now come to the second Opposition Day motion on sewage. I inform the House that the Speaker has selected the Amendment A tabled in the name of the Prime Minister. I call Tim Farron to move the motion.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's an honour to have this opportunity. For me to serve the people of Westmorland means also defending Westmorland's natural beauty, its purity, its importance to our national heritage, to our farming industry, to our tourism and hospitality economy. So our proposal today aims to highlight the scandal of the pollution of our waterways, and it calls for some practical solutions that will make a difference. The government's recent Water Act was a step in the right direction after the failure of the last Conservative government to take meaningful action. Yet that act was surely also a missed opportunity for the radical transformation of regulation and of ownership that is essential if we're going to clean up our waterways and clean up the water industry as a whole. Now, Sir John Cunliffe's review gives us the hope that a more ambitious second water bill might be coming. But there is no guarantee of that, and so our job as the constructive opposition in this place is to hold the government to account and urge them to make the big changes that Britain voted for last July. That need for radical action was made all the more clear recently when the figures for sewage spills for 2024 were released, and those figures were horrific. A 106% increase in the duration of spills in our lakes, rivers and seas in just 2 short years. I will happily give way.
Thank you. Over Easter in Torbay, we had 5 sewage spills, according to the Service Against Sewage app. Would my right honourable friend agree with me that it is extremely disappointing, to say the least, that rather than just getting your cossie and your towel to go and swimming at your favourite swimming spot, colleagues now have to also check the sewage leak app? It's outrageous.
I agree with him. He makes a really good point about his own communities, and absolutely that is the point of what we're trying to address today, to bring practical solutions to prevent this outrage. That 106% increase in just 2 years of the duration of sewage spills has been explained away on the record by water industry bosses as being the consequence of climate change, because it rains more than it used to. Yes, that's absolutely true. But it does not rain 106% more in 2024 than it did in 2022, not even in the Lake District, Madam Deputy Speaker. The reality is that the failure of water companies to invest in their infrastructure and the failure of Ofwat to force them to do so means that the scandal is set to continue despite the government's new legislation. Now, I confess... I will happily give way.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. There were 754 spills in my constituency of Mid-Sussex last year alone. We don't want to see these numbers anywhere, but in a constituency that does not have a major waterway, this is absurdly high. Does my honourable friend agree with me that if we want to start genuinely holding these water companies to account, a great place to start would be with replacing Ofwat?
She anticipates where I'm going next, but yes, that takes some doing to have those sort of figures in a constituency lacking in water, or certainly lacking in it compared to my neck of the woods. And so I do confess that it's not just because my right honourable friend, the member for Kingston Surbiton, asked me to do this job. I would volunteer for all this kind of stuff because to me and my communities, water is seriously personal. We are the home to much of the English Lake District, Windermere, Ullswater, Coniston Water, Grasmere, Rydal Water and many, many more. We're the home of a beautiful stretch of Morecambe Bay and for some of the most ecologically significant rivers in the UK, including the Kent, the Eden and the Leven. And yet the data for 2024 shows that we are the 3rd hardest hit constituency in England when it comes to duration of sewage spills. 55,000 plus hours of spills, 5,500 individual incidents. I will let him in a moment. The catchment of the River Eden going through Appleby and Kirkby Stephen, many other beautiful villages saw over 7,000 hours of spills on 705 occasions. The River Kent catchment saw 5,300 hours of spills on 455 occasions. Windermere alone had 38 spills over 123 hours. And at that point, I'm happy to let the honourable gentleman intervene. Sorry.
constructive opposition spokesperson for giving way. I don't know what that makes them. But I thank him for giving way, and he is making a really powerful speech, and I look forward to having the opportunity to visit his constituent at some point, because it sounds absolutely beautiful. Would he agree with me, though, that it's absolutely disgraceful that while this sewage is being leaked, the CEOs of water companies are still paying themselves exorbitant bonuses?
Makes a really good point, and he will of course be enormously welcome to visit the lakes and the dales, and yes, that is a key point. It's something I will seek to address. There's not only the injustice of people being paid huge bonuses for failure at the top of these organisations, that's money leaving the system and the industry that could have been invested in putting some of this right. And so, of course, I've talked about my patch, but colleagues from all across this House, from every party and from every corner of the United Kingdom, will have seen the data for their communities too, and should rightly be outraged, as I'm sure is my honourable friend.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. He talked quite correctly about a beautiful part of England. I also represent a very beautiful part of the world. Here's an unbelievable fact for you. In 2023, I've written it on my hand, there were no less than 1,439 sewage spills in the Highlands. What a disgrace that none of the Scottish Nationalists are with us here today, the governing party in Scotland.
Well, he makes an important observation from a constituency, vast and rural. I mean, my constituency is the second largest in England. It is bijou and compact compared to my honourable friends, and he makes a very good point about the administration in Scotland. And as already been alluded to by the honourable gentleman on the other side a moment or two ago, sewage spills weren't the only things to increase. So did the money leaking out of the system. Water company bosses received a total combined pay last year of £20 million and more. The water companies responsible for these failures paid out £1.2 billion in dividends. Surfers Against Sewage, who have been mentioned already by my honourable friend, have led the way for many, many years before many others were even talking about this issue, and their research... I will happily, before I go there...
I'm most grateful to the honourable member for giving way. Whilst talking about dividends, does he agree with me that it's completely wrong that tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions, also leak out on high interest on internal shareholder loans of those who own the water companies?
I'm going to talk later a little bit about why privatisation of the water industry was such a colossal mistake. And that's one of the consequences, the predictable consequence, and he makes a very good point. I'll just go back to what Surfers Against Sewage have been saying. Their research recently, and it covers all of the water companies, I'm bound to pick out United Utilities as an example, but they picked out that United Utilities paid out £320 million last year to investors, while their customers, my constituents, will pay 32% more in bills. And 11% of every one of my constituents' water bills, by the way, is going to service that company's debts. Debts that were in part racked up by borrowing money in order to give huge undeserved paydays to their investors. Did I hear? I did.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. In South Devon last year, we had an astonishing 49,904 hours of sewage leaks, which is 5.69 years' worth of sewage pouring into the glorious Dart and Avon and in the sea around South Devon. Meanwhile, my constituents are writing to me with bills that have gone up by as much as 50%. Wow. Would my honourable friend agree that it's an outrage that the privatised water companies are able to carry on increasing bills, increasing dividends to shareholders, paying multi-million pound salaries to CEOs, while this obscenity of sewage continues to pour into our rivers, seas and lakes?
She represents an utterly beautiful part of the country, and she fights for it admirably, and they're lucky to have her. And she makes a really important point. Of course, I mentioned that 11% of the bills paid by my constituents in the northwest of England goes to service the debt of United Utilities. Actually, that's one of the lowest levels. For many other constituents, many other colleagues on both sides of the House, their local water companies will be charging up to 30% of the bill cost just to pay off or not even to pay off, just to service the debt of that company. So the sewage scandal is an environmental scandal, but it is also a financial scandal, an affront to justice and fairness, as well as it is to our ecology. Now, I would happily give way.
I'm grateful to my friend for giving way. It's also a health scandal. And what water companies are doing by allowing sewage to seep into our coast and rivers is those people who enjoy that environment for swimming, etc., many of them fall ill and many of them lose days at work. So really, as well as the cost to the taxpayer in terms of cleaning up the environment, they should also be making a contribution to the Exchequer to cover sick pay and the cost to the NHS.
Fund is so important, but he makes a really important point on behalf, particularly of his coastal and island communities in the far southwest, and they are also very lucky to have him speaking up for them. The Windrush Against Sewage Pollution campaign and the Save Windermere campaign worked together to put together a report very recently to show that the use of funds for capital projects by water companies around the country was at best wasteful and negligent, and at worst, dare I say, deeply, deeply suspect. Now, they focused on the proposal by, again, United Utilities to spend almost £13 million of local bill payers' money on an extension to a sewage outfall pipe into Windermere. Now, as laid out in their report, WASP found this to be, and I quote, excessive, and then also pointed out that it seems unreasonable that 43 three-bedroom houses could be built for the price of putting a mere 150-metre sewage pipe into a lake. The report shines a light on what WASP considered to be inflated capital spending costs for water companies around the country, and it rightly asks the question, what is Ofwat doing signing this stuff off? Signing off huge bill increases when water companies are not spending that money wisely. I would happily give way. Yeah.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend for giving way. He's outlined the outrage and the scandal of sewage leaking into our rivers, lakes and seas. It's also the case that sewage is spilling out onto our streets, and groundwater infiltration causes much of the problems, and Thames Water in my area have so far refused to do anything about Pooh Corner in the parish of Berwick alone. Will he agree with me that this is also an issue we need to be addressing?
Until now, I always thought the house at Pooh Corner was a good thing, and obviously that would not be so. And in my own patch, I've seen the same thing. In the village of Burneyside, we're now finally, after 20 years of campaigning, going to get some additional new sewage infrastructure, which will hopefully prevent poop, literally in light rainfall, coming up onto the pavements where the local kids get the bus to go into Kendal to school, which is an absolute outrage. And so he's right to campaign, as he does so very well, for his communities on this issue. Now, we should already know not to take water companies at their word, I'm afraid, Madam Deputy Speaker, given their shoddy record of data transparency. For example, the Chief Executive of United Utilities, amongst others, Louise Beardmore, admitted at the EFRA Select Committee not very long ago that they had refused to release spill data until WASP appealed to the Information Commissioner. Furthermore, in 2022, United Utilities was listed as the best performing water company in England, for which it was allowed to raise its bills as a reward. However, the BBC reported whistleblowers at the Environment Agency claiming that the United Utilities had been wrongly downgrading dozens of pollution incidents. So we can surely be forgiven, Madam Deputy Speaker, therefore, for being a little cynical when those water companies propose huge sums for projects like the one that I have just mentioned. And this is why our key criticism of the government's new Water Act is not anything that was in that legislation, but of what was missing from it. That water companies can be responsible for record levels of sewage pollution and to be shown to make bad use of bill payers' money with inflated capital costs and inflated dividends could not happen if they were regulated properly. But they are not regulated properly.
On that point,
I would be delighted to give way. Yeah.
Thank you so much for giving way. So, in my constituency in Epsom Newell in March, phosphate levels in the River Mole They surged by 50% and nitrates doubled. This is pollution that can cause algal blooms and suffocate wildlife. Does my honourable friend agree that we urgently need a clean water authority with real enforcement powers to protect our rivers before it's simply too late?
I completely do agree with her, and I think she's absolutely right to make that point, particularly given the experience she has in her own constituency. She rightly and very forcefully fights for her communities and to clean up her waterways. She will have seen, like all of us, that the principal problem is about a failure of regulation. And so there has to be an answer to that, and the Liberal Democrats' proposal, which I'll come to in a moment, we hope will create, if it solves a problem, great, but it will certainly make it more likely to be dealt with effectively. Because the water industry's regulatory framework is fragmented and it is weak. The regulators lack the resource, the power and the culture, it would appear, to make a serious difference. And that's why the Liberal Democrats do propose a new Clean Water Authority, so that water companies stop running rings around multiple regulators and begin to act in the interests of the British people and of the waterways that we love. And I will happily give way.
For giving way. I also represent a very beautiful part of the Yorkshire Dales with Wharfdale, and there it's Yorkshire Water who've been responsible for hundreds of thousands of hours of sewage spills into the rivers. They were fined by Ofwat £47 million for their poor performance in 2023, for that only to be repeated in 2024. So will the honourable gentleman firstly welcome the action that this government has already taken through the Special Measures Act 2025, more than the previous government ever did to tackle this disgusting problem, and also recognise that we see the problems with regulation, and we do need stronger regulation of the water industry to protect the environment and public health, and that is the role of the Cunliffe Review.
I absolutely do, and have said at the beginning of this debate that I welcome the Act. I think it's a step in the right direction. I just don't think it is enough. And she makes the point as to why it's not enough. Because her water company, Yorkshire, is one of, I think, 4 water companies who, between them, owe Ofwat £164 million worth of fines because of failure. And Ofwat has so far claimed zero, none of that. There seems to be an awareness on behalf of the water companies that Ofwat are not a regulator to be feared and therefore not a regulator to be responded to. And it is amongst the reasons why we think that we need to have a new and much more powerful regulator. I will give way in a second. And that includes a regulator that has the power and uses the powers to refuse to sign off on spending plans that prioritise the investor over the consumer or the environment. And I will be happy to give way.
The honourable gentleman for giving way. Can I thank him and his party for bringing this motion? It is very important that we improve the quality of our rivers and seas. Does he share with me my concern that in the Water Special Measures Bill, the government refused to allow local areas to retain the money fined from water companies to improve the environment in that area? And that, were they able to do that, that would lead to a real improvement in the quality of our environment.
I agree, and he may check the record and see us voting, I think, with the party alongside us here in opposition on that in the committee stage of the bill. And I think he makes a very good point. The communities most damaged by pollution should be the ones that receive the investment that comes about from the fines, if indeed Ofwat ever bothers to collect them. But alongside the need for reform of regulation, we also propose a radical transformation in the ownership model. Now, privatisation of the water industry has been an expensive failure. 35 years of huge debts and huge payouts to investors, 35 years of inadequate investment in our infrastructure, the Conservative promise of Britain becoming a share-owning democracy turned into the predictable nightmare reality of British public utilities owned by billionaires and foreign powers. What an absolute disgrace. And the end result is the rivers, lakes and seas in which we swim, fish, canoe, sail, work and play, polluted by an industry now owned by those who took but would not give. So water companies need new models of ownership, transitioning to public benefit companies that are focused on environmental good, not profiteering with the funds from customers' bills pumped back into upgrading and repairing infrastructure, not draining away in dividends. So we welcome the Independent Water Commission chaired by Sir John Cunliffe, though we remain impatient given the time it will take to publish the Commission's finding and then the further period of their findings, the further period of time that it may take for the government to do anything about them, followed by a legislative process, an implementation period, and we'll be at the end of the Parliament before you know it, Madam Deputy Speaker. But to be fair, with the Commission, the government is providing itself with a second chance to bring in the ambitious changes that are needed, and we urge them not to miss this chance. Now, the Minister, in fact, all the Ministers will remember with deep joy, I imagine, the 44 amendments that the Liberal Democrats sought to propose, every last one of them, to the water bill. In our submission to Sir John, I have sought to turn those amendments into a single set of proposals to restore our water industry to environmental and financial health and to harness the amazing power of citizen scientists and volunteers up and down the country. It's why we called for inclusion of water campaigners such as WASP, Save Windermere, the Clean River Kent campaign, the Eden Rivers Trust, the South Lakes Rivers Trust, to have them on water company boards. It's why we call for the government's very welcome new sewage spills database to be a searchable and retrospectively searchable tool, so that we don't hamstring those brilliant volunteers they seek to hold the water industry and its regulators to account. Out there are tens of thousands of people giving their expertise, their time and their passion to cleaning up our waterways. Let's let them off the leash. Let's equip them and empower them. I was sad to see Conservative and Labour colleagues refuse to support these measures during the passage of the Water Act, but I hope they will have a change of heart today. In the proposal we have before us today, we specifically urge the establishment of a new system of blue flag status for rivers and for chalk streams as a practical way to force water companies to be more accountable for the safety of the swimmers that use them and for the ongoing protection and flourishing of precious habitats and ecosystems. Here too. I'll go there and then I'll go several places.
For the Honourable Member for giving way. Voting for the recent Water Special Measures Act and serving on the Bill Committee with the Honourable Member for Westmorland and Lonsdale was one of the highlights of my first 6 months in this place. As a coastal community MP, it is so important to my constituents that we get this right. So taking a long-term, transformative approach is the right approach, in my opinion. Would the Honourable Member agree with me that it's not just the safety of residents and tourists that will benefit from the changes that this government is introducing to clean up our water, but it's also the selfless volunteers of organisations like the RNLI in places like Weston-super-Mare who deserve to do their vital life-saving work in the cleanest, safest water possible?
Completely agree, and the feeling is mutual. I appreciate having gone on a little bit. I'm also appreciate a few people trying to intervene on me. So, am I allowed to go hands up? Yes, my honourable friend.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for giving way, who's making a typically good speech. I wonder if you'd agree with me that even if you don't have an area where you can go swimming in your constituency, the water in your constituency is going to end up in one of those areas. So the rivers Rodda and Perry in my constituency both suffer from over 2,000 hours of sewage spills in them last year, the Perry being affected by one into the Common Brook near Worcester. Not only does this go past farmers' fields, it ends up in Shrewsbury where there's a designated swimming area. I wouldn't swim in it. Does he agree with me that the blue flag status would clear up the whole catchment and not just a place where people go swimming?
It's a really excellent...
Stands to his feet, you can speak as long as you want, but the longer you speak, the less likely it is for the rest of the colleagues to be able to contribute as well. Mr. Farron.
Yes. So I'll take guidance from you and maybe only allow 2 more. I'm towards the end and I appreciate your guidance. I'm trying to be not selfish, trying to be generous and getting the balance right. I don't want to squeeze people out altogether. But I will give my honourable friend one of the last 2 berths that are going. Go for it.
Thank you for giving way. Last week, I joined residents in my constituency of Stratford-on-Avon who are involved in citizen science projects, testing water quality in the Rivers Tower, and the findings were deeply concerning. Very high levels of phosphates and nitrates in the water, clear evidence of the ongoing damage to our waterways. Does my honourable friend join me to commend the important work of these citizen science projects volunteers, but also does he agree that we need the Environment Agency to be properly resourced to monitor the water quality in our rivers, brooks, streams and seas?
With that, and I mean, the ministers are really, really lucky in so many ways. Obviously, they're in the best department, and they, like a few others out in government, have an army of volunteers to call upon to help them to be their arms and legs out there in the communities. And we just ask the government to empower them even more. If there's one more, I'll take them, and then it's all over. Right, I'm ploughing on. Great, excellent. So I will now plough on to the bitter end, and it won't be too far off, I promise you. But people have talked about blue flag status, and this is, if you like, one of the key proposals in the motion in front of us today. And the point of blue flag status for rivers and for chalk streams and for lakes, it's a practical way to force water companies to be more accountable for the safety of swimmers and the ongoing protection and flourishing of precious habitats and ecosystems. So we call on the government to introduce a blue corridor programme for rivers, chalk streams and lakes to ensure clean and healthy water through the creation of that new blue flag status. Many rivers and lakes have sites with bathing water status. I'm thinking of Coniston and Windermere in my own patch. But what will surprise many people is the fact that having bathing water status just means that the location will get tested more frequently. It does not automatically mean that it's any more clean. There were over 24,000 sewage spills last year into our bathing waters alone, for a duration of over 179,000 hours. Surfers Against Sewage found the government's new bathing water feasibility test lacking, and they describe it could mean that sites deemed too polluted risk being immediately denied this designation, unable to receive the monitoring and investment needed to make blue spaces cleaner and safer. And as my honourable friend, the member for Taunton and Wellington, pointed out recently, this gives water companies a loophole to let them get away without cleaning up a bathing site that people use regularly because it's too polluted anyway. If it is a popular swimming site, it must be cleaned up. In contrast, a blue flag status would be granted only at those sites where the data showed that the water was clean and safe. We give swimmers and other river users proper evidence-based confidence in their safety. And if we needed evidence that our proposals are desperately needed, in 2024 alone, Surfers Against Sewage received 1,853 sickness reports from contact with our waterways. That's 9 years' worth of sick days. We also, just a brief aside, but it's so important and central to what we're trying to achieve, we want to also provide special protection for our chalk streams. Rare, ecologically unique habitats, often referred to as England's rainforests, yet even they have come under threat from sewage dumping in recent years. Blue flag status for chalk streams would drive their recovery after years of abuse. To conclude, to represent the precious lakes and dales of Westmorland and Lonsdale is a massive privilege, and it is also a huge responsibility. We know in our communities that it is our collective calling to steward the epic slice of creation that surrounds us, and that includes the stunning waters, meres and tarns of the Lake District, our coasts and our rivers. They are not ours to keep, they are ours to preserve for the people of these islands and beyond, and for the people of this generation and for the generations that we shall never meet. Politics is also a great calling. It allows us, in this case, to establish the structures that will enable that stewardship of our waterways to be effective, to be more than just words, but to mean practical change for the better. Our motion today gives the House the opportunity to do practical good, and to do so now, without further dither or delay. Residents in every community of our country want us to listen to them and to act to end the sewage scandal. We must not let them down.
The question is as on the order paper, and I call the Secretary of State, Steve Reid, to move the amendment.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I beg to move the amendment standing in the name of the Prime Minister on the order paper. Madam Deputy Speaker, I welcome the chance to set out the action the Government is taking to end the sewage scandal in our waterways once and for all. The staggeringly high level of sewage pouring into our rivers, lakes and seas is a national disgrace. The beach in Deal I visited just a couple of weeks ago was forced to cancel their Boxing Day swim because of toxic levels of sewage in the water. The world-famous Oxford and Cambridge boat race earlier this month was yet again overshadowed by concerns over water quality in the Thames, so much so that rowers were told not to throw their teammates into the river.
Member for giving way. He mentions the boat race in Oxford, but of course in 10 weeks' time we'll be welcoming the world's rowers to Henley at the Royal Regatta. Would he also share my concerns of the amount of sewage being dumped in that part of the Thames, which is blighting the event?
I'm grateful to him for his intervention, and I absolutely share his concerns. Wherever it's happening, where it is damaging people's ability to enjoy our rivers, it is a disgrace and it is a scandal, and it's what we want to work across this House to put right. Now, parents across the country shouldn't have to worry about letting their children splash about in the river or paddle in the sea during a sunny bank holiday weekend. I recently met campaigners at Windermere in the Honourable Gentleman's constituency who told me they are sick and tired of the sewage flowing into that iconically beautiful lake on their doorstep that a few years ago caused algae blooms that turned it bright green. Up and down the country, the public are furious about water pollution. So am I. So is this House. So how did we get into this situation? It is, I'm afraid to say, the toxic result of years of failure by the previous Conservative government. Instead of fixing our sewage system before a problem turned into a crisis, the Conservatives stood back and let water companies divert millions of pounds of their customers' money into the pockets of their bosses and their shareholders. Over £25 million was paid in bonuses to water company chief execs during the last Parliament alone. The Tories left our water infrastructure to crumble into ruin.
Opportunity. Putting party politics aside for a moment, I want to point out to him that Southern Water was fined a record amount of £90 million for dumping raw sewage in 2021. Last year, it received another fine for dumping sewage in rivers near Southampton. And this year, bills have risen by almost 50% for residents in Farron, Waterlooville. They're now proposing to recycle effluent water in Bud's Farm, near my constituency, to distribute drinking water to residents in Farron, Waterlooville. Will the Secretary of State, putting party politics aside, do the right thing and reject Southern Water's proposal, which is expensive, disruptive and dubious? I don't trust Southern Water, and my constituents don't. Will he do the right thing?
Well, I thank her for her intervention, of course, but I hope she will work with the government and support the reforms that we're bringing forward to improve the functioning and performance of the water sector and all of the water companies up and down the country, so that we can prevent the kind of concerns that she's speaking about in her own constituency. But looking at the record of the past government, if you see a crack in the wall of your house and you leave it for 10 years, the problem gets much worse and it costs much more to put it right. And that is exactly what happened with our sewage system. The result is rivers, lakes and seas across this country choked by record levels of raw human filth, and bills rising to repair damage that could have been carried out at much lower cost if it had been done earlier. The Tories, I'm afraid, polluted our waterways, then left bill payers to pay the price for their failure. No wonder they stand condemned as the sewage party.
I'm grateful to the Secretary of State for giving way. My constituency is served by Thames Water, the largest provider in the country. And every week in my surgery, it's fair to say I have people who, frankly, have given up on this issue ever being fixed. Can the Secretary of State provide my constituents and the rest of the country reassurance that this Labour government will fix the issues left by the party opposite?
I'm grateful to his, for his intervention. And as he would have seen, we've already passed the Water Special Measures Act, which gives the regulators more teeth to enforce against the polluting water companies. We're looking forward to Sir John Cunliffe's review and the Water Commission. We get the interim report next month, the final report the month after that, and that will lead to further action to reset this sector once and for all.
I thank the Minister. On the water bill, it's wonderful to hear the Minister say that he wants to take action against criminal action against water companies and bosses, but I actually tabled an amendment to do just that, which was rejected by the government. And it's interesting that now that the bill has passed, that they're so keen. Why didn't they just accept my amendment or a similar amendment? Because it doesn't actually mention criminal charges and what they're going to do like my amendment did in the bill, but it passed without that measure being put in place. And now they're saying, from a point of retrospective, gleefulness from the dispatch box, that they would like to put that in. And I just wondered if that's going to actually happen.
With the greatest of respect, their party had 14 years to take action and they did nothing. Now, while I'm grateful to the Liberal Democrats for calling this debate, and I think there are many points of similarity between our approaches, I must gently point to some of the opportunities they missed to take action when they were in government. The Environment Agency, for instance, had its funding cut by more than half between 2010 and 2019, leading to a fall in prosecutions against water companies and other polluters. And of course, there were Liberal Democrats in the coalition cabinet that started those cuts. The coalition government published a report in 2011. Just one moment, please. The coalition government published a report in 2011 which wrongly and, in my view, bizarrely concluded that water regulation, quote, works and is not fundamentally flawed. And of course, under that coalition government, a Liberal Democrat minister was responsible for the water sector between 2013 and 2015 and disappointingly kept in place the very system of regulation that the Right Honourable Gentleman has quite rightly just criticised.
With the Secretary, I'm grateful to the Secretary of State for giving way. Would the Secretary of State recognise if one looks at the budget papers for 2009 and 2010, it shows that the then Labour Chancellor was actually projecting bigger capital cuts in expenditure than actually were carried out under the coalition government?
I don't think what happened, decisions taken by the coalition government, were the fault of the previous Labour government. I'm merely gently pointing out that the Liberal Democrats did have a chance to reset regulation in the way this government is doing now. I'm grateful for their support where they offer it for that work, and I think by working constructively right across the House, we can make sure that we reset now a water sector that has failed the public, consumers' investment and the environment for far too long. Yes, I'll give way one and then two.
Secretary of State for giving way. In my constituency, the cut runs from Binfield all the way through to the Thames. They had 615 hours worth of sewage pumped into it last year, known by no one more than Danny in my constituency, whose dog had to be put down having got so ill from swimming in it. But will he agree with me that no matter how many fines we put on Thames Water, when ultimately that comes back to our bills and we have to pay for it, it will do absolutely nothing to deter the shareholders and make them invest properly where needed?
Well, he makes a very powerful case for why reform is so desperately needed, and my condolences to the owner of the dog. That's a terrible thing to happen to anybody.
Secretary of State for giving way again. Bill payers in my constituency of Shipley are faced with an 18% hike in their bills. By 2030, that could be as much as 35%. Now, already, as part of that bill, about 19% of the bill is servicing the debt of the holding company that owns Yorkshire Water. The failure to tackle these problems in the water industry by the opposition parties, plural, opposite, during their time in government, are not our customers now paying the price for their failure to address this?
Well, she's absolutely right, of course, and I thank her for her intervention. But I'm angry about the bill rises. She is too. I'm sure members on all sides of the House are. But in a very real sense, those people are being forced to pay the price for 14 years of Conservative failure. Now, previous governments let the sewage scandal spread. This government will end it once and for all. And that work began as soon as we came into office. Within 1 week of the general election, I invited the water company chief executives into my office and I ring-fenced money earmarked for investment in water infrastructure so it can never again be diverted for payment as bonuses or dividends. That was... Yep.
welcome the rapid action this government has taken to hold failing water companies to account. Does the Secretary of State share my view that it's simply disgraceful that water company CEOs such as Yorkshire Water's Nicola Shaw, who paid herself £371,000 bonus, were able to pay themselves multi-million-pound bonuses while overseeing record levels of sewage spills?
Well, she's absolutely right, of course, and that's why we've given the regulator new powers in the Water Special Measures Bill, something the party opposite could have done at any point during their 14 years in power, but at no point did they actually take that common-sense piece of action. And, of course, we passed that landmark piece of legislation, the Water Special Measures Act, which became law in February of this year. It gives the regulator tough new powers to hold water companies to account. A ban on unfair bonuses when water company bosses fail to meet high standards. Stricter penalties, including up to 2 years in prison if water company employees obstruct investigations by environmental regulators. And severe and automatic fines for wrongdoing. Environmental regulators can now recover costs for successful enforcement, meaning the polluter pays and the regulators gain new resources to enforce more effectively. This, I will give way.
I thank the Secretary of State for giving way. I would suggest to the Secretary of State the problem may be more deep-seated than we realise, because the Secretary of State mentioned algal blooms in the Lake District, which not only turn the water a strange colour, but the fact is that these blooms suck the oxygen out of the water, and that indeed leads to the death of wildlife in the water. Furthermore, sewage contains heavy metals and other toxic substances that can not only kill fish, if it doesn't kill them, it'll affect their ability to reproduce. So you may find ecosystems that have been damaged in a much longer term than we realise.
So I thank him for his intervention, and of course I recognise the catastrophe that he is talking about. It's not just that the water is polluted, the water becomes toxic and it's killing ecosystems and damaging the wider environment. Those are all reasons why we need to move ahead quickly with the reforms that this government is working towards. I'll give way 2 more times, and I'd better make some progress, or Madam Deputy Speaker will chastise me as she chastised the Right Honourable Gentleman.
I thank the Secretary of State for giving way genuinely, and he is right to outline his legislation that he's bringing forward. But on the ground, there's still frustration that when pollution is happening in rivers, such as in my constituency in Buckley, where we are still seeing overflows, not sewage overflows, but from development pollutants going into the river, and parish councils identifying that very quickly and coming to me. The accountability structures behind water companies, such as Southern Water, who will not answer to elected members like myself, is still not seeing the improvement that he's advocating at the dispatch box. Will he agree to meet with me and my parish council to outline the concerns that he have? And can he just outline very briefly, Madam Deputy Speaker, on how further the Water Emergency Act, or the Sewage Act that he's just brought forward, will be able to add to that accountability for parish councils and local residents?
He makes a very important point, and one of the issues that Sir John Cunliffe and the Water Commission are looking at is how we can increase accountability and responsiveness directly to customers and indeed authorities like the parish councils he's just talked about. And I would be happy to arrange a meeting for him with the appropriate minister. One more and then I'll make some progress.
The Secretary of State for giving way. The Secretary of State referred to rare ecological rivers that can be damaged by by sewage pollution. In my constituency of St Albans, we have a very rare chalk stream, the River Ver. Thames Water says that much of the sewage dumping happens, sewage spills, because the pipes are old and they're porous. Part of the solution to that is to line them, but when they're lining pipes, they're not prioritising pipes that are close to rare chalk streams. Would the Secretary of State meet with me to discuss my bill, which would make water companies prioritise those pipes that are close to chalk streams because of their rare ecological status?
Thank her for her intervention, and I know the River Ver very well. I used to walk past it every day on my way to primary school at the Abbey Primary School at the bottom of the Abbey Orchard. I would be happy to make sure that she gets a meeting with the appropriate minister to raise those points. Now, the additional new resources that our reforms will give to the regulators are underpinned by mandatory monitoring of storm overflows and pollution incidents. Water companies in England and Wales must now publish information on the frequency and duration of discharges from every single storm overflow within 1 hour of the discharge happening. We've extended this to emergency overflows, so all spills will be publicly reported in near real time. We expect water companies to monitor 50% of them by 2030 and the rest by 2035. And companies are now required to publish their annual pollution incident reduction plans and implementation reports to outline the progress they've made and show the public they have a credible plan to end the scandal of water pollution. These measures give the water regulators new powers to hold water companies to account and ensure customers and the environment always come first. We can, Madam Deputy Speaker, and we will turn the water sector around. We've secured over £104 billion of private sector investment in the water sector over the next 5 years. That's the biggest investment into our water sector in its history and the second biggest investment into any part of the economy over the lifetime of this Parliament. It will build and upgrade water infrastructure in every single region of the country, cut sewage spills by 45% compared to 2021 levels, and drastically improve the quality of water in our rivers, lakes and seas. It will allow us to move ahead with 9 new reservoirs and 9 large-scale water transfer schemes and reduce leaks from crumbling pipes so we have a reliable water supply for the future. This vast investment will create tens of thousands of jobs up and down the country, allow us to go ahead with building 1.5 million new homes, support 150 major infrastructure projects and power new industries with high water usage such as data centres. This is the regional economic growth the country voted for last year. This is the Labour Party's plan for change in action.
Gentlemen for giving way, and I think a lot of what has been put forward is something that people on all sides of the House agree with. I'm very fortunate to have a beautiful River Trent in my constituency and the River Sow and Penk. But one of the big issues is new development on housing, and he touched on the issue of new development on housing and the runoff from these developments not being properly attenuated. And I wondered if there's something he could touch on as to how that can best be dealt with, because, you know, the right reasons of building homes, but sometimes causing unintended consequences.
He's absolutely right, and I've asked John Cunliffe to look at measures that we can implement to start to address the point that he's making, and indeed wider issues around nutrient neutrality in our waterways. Now, last month, I'm going to make some progress, if you don't mind, because I don't want to take up too much of the debate myself. Last month, the Water Minister and I toured the country to see where and how this investment will be spent, from Windermere to the Wye, Hampshire to Yorkshire, Suffolk, Northumbria and Somerset. In Windermere, we are working with local groups and organisations to eliminate all sewage discharges into the lake. This includes schemes that allows owners of septic tanks to connect to the main sewer network so they no longer discharge directly into the water. On the River Wye, we're running a £1 million joint research initiative with the Welsh Government to tackle water quality issues across the catchment. We're working with local farmers, environmental groups and citizen scientists to investigate the sources of the pollution so we can tackle them effectively. I'm going to make some progress if he doesn't mind too much. The southeast of England will face severe water shortages by 2030 if we don't act urgently. So we are supporting new infrastructure such as the Havant Thicket Reservoir that will store almost 9 billion litres of water when it's completed. This is just the start of our wider plan to fundamentally reset the water sector so it's fit for the future. I am grateful to Sir John Cunliffe, the former Deputy Governor of the Bank of England, for undertaking the biggest review of the water sector since privatisation. He's supported by an advisory group of experts covering the environment, public health, investors, engineering, customers and economics. The failures of regulation and governance that allowed our water system to decline into such scandalous failure must never happen again. This summer, Sir John will publish his findings into how we can build the robust regulatory framework we need to clean up our waterways, build infrastructure for a reliable water supply and restore public confidence. If he doesn't mind, I'm going to make a little more progress because I've taken up over 20 minutes of people's time already. Sir John is looking at how we can embrace a catchment-based approach to cleaning up our rivers, and our farming roadmap will support farmers to transition to more nature-positive farming methods that will reduce agricultural runoff into our waterways. I hope many members have shared their views as part of the Water Commission's call for evidence, which closes, incidentally, at the end of today. The Government will respond and consult on the Commission's recommendations, and we intend to legislate so we can completely reset our water sector for the future. The Water Minister has announced reforms to shake up our water bathing regulations for the first time in more than a decade, so that more people, whether swimmers, paddleboarders or surfers, can get outside and enjoy our waters safely. Our proposals would remove the fixed bathing season dates from the regulations to better reflect when people actually use our waters and allow greater flexibility in monitoring. They will also, I will let him this time because he's been very persistent.
Thank you, Secretary of State, for giving way on that point. I was just reading your core reforms, and core reform 3 does indeed, as you state, change the way the season for bathing is changed. However, it continues the principle that water is not tested by the Environment Agency all year round. That is an important thing that is missed. That has to be changed. When you have a season, then the water will be polluted in... Will the Secretary of State look at changing that to all year round testing for our blue flag areas, please?
Response. I would like him to consider we have over 30 colleagues wishing to contribute, and the longer that the Secretary of State speaks, the less likely it is that they'll all get in. Secretary of State.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I won't take any more interventions. And I hear the point that he's making. Public health is a priority in the reforms that we're making. And the Environment Agency must also consider public safety in the environment when they're assessing applications for bathing waters, and remove harmful automatic designation of bathing waters so we can continue to invest in and improve these sites. Applications for new bathing waters will open next month, adding to the more than 450 bathing waters around the country. Details of how to apply are online. The sewage scandal ends with this Labour government. Our groundbreaking Water Act gives regulators tough new powers to hold water companies to account. They will no longer get away with polluting our waterways and rewarding themselves with undeserved bonuses for what they've done. This is a fresh start for the water sector, a fundamental reset that will clean up our waterways, create thousands of jobs, grow the economy and give us a reliable water supply for decades to come. Exciting progress is already being made. The Thames Tideway Tunnel was fully activated in February, an amazing feat of British engineering and entrepreneurial spirit that will reduce sewage spills into the Thames by around 95%. Since coming into operation, the tunnel has captured enough sewage to fill Wembley Stadium 5 times over and stopped it pouring into the river. I want to see innovation like this, not just in London, but right across the country, bringing investment, driving regional economic growth and cleaning up our waterways for good. Madam Deputy Speaker, in conclusion, many of us cherish memories from childhood of summer holidays on the beach, exploring rock pools or splashing about in the waves. Today's children deserve to make those same magical memories that we did. This is our moment to give our children back the future that is their birthright, to restore pride in our rivers, lakes and seas, to end the sewage scandal and clean up our waterways for good. This is the prize, and this is the government that will make it happen.
The original question was as on the order paper. Since when the Amendment A has been proposed, as on the order paper, the question is that the original words stand part of the question. Before I call the Shadow Secretary of State, because the front bench contributions have been so substantial, backbenchers will now be on a time limit of 3 minutes when I turn to them. I call the Shadow Secretary of State, Victoria Atkins.
Madam Deputy Speaker, because I respect the fact that this is the Liberal Democrats Opposition Day debate, I have genuinely been cutting sides out of my speech, so I hope they'll forgive me if I don't take every intervention that is offered to me. And may I thank the Liberal Democrats for choosing to debate this important issue. We all know and agree that there are fundamental problems facing the water and sewage industry. A drainage and sewage system that was first built in the Victorian era does not meet the needs of the population that it must now serve or the pressures of more frequent and severe weather events. To fix the problem, we must first diagnose it and measure it. And that is why, under the previous government, we took the essential step of radically overhauling the monitoring of storm overflows. Now, the Secretary of State on previous occasions has dismissed the significance of this data collection and monitoring, and I think that is unfair, because when we came into government in 2010, the Labour government had left us, as well as the Liberal Democrats in the coalition government, with a water system that was out of control, with just 7% of storm overflows being monitored. In other words, people were swimming and playing in water across the country without knowing that it had been contaminated with raw sewage. And indeed, I had the pleasure of going to school in Blackpool, and we knew there were certain times of the summer season where locals would not venture into the sea because we knew some of the consequences that would happen if we dared to do so. And so the point I make to everyone in this chamber is that this is a long-standing set of problems. To pretend otherwise, I'm afraid, as I know some people get a little carried away with their advocacy, to pretend otherwise is not doing either the public, our constituents, or indeed our waterways themselves the justice that they deserve. And it is, we are proud of the fact that by the time we left government, we had met our ambitious target to ensure that 100% of storm overflows are monitored. The importance of this is emphasised. I'll just finish this point and then I'll take the intervention. The importance of this is emphasised by the interventions we've already heard today, because members across this House have been citing the very, very stark and shocking statistics of storm overflows, sewage overflows and so on in their own constituencies. They rely on those figures rightly already in this debate, and I've no doubt will rely on them in their speeches as well. But in the dark days before 2010, their predecessors would not have had this information. I see a Labour member laughing about that. I don't know why she's laughing about knowing more about the data collection so that we can correct it. I had an intervention over here. I'll take the intervention. I'm happy to take the intervention.
The Shadow Minister for giving way. Monitoring sewage overflows does not immediately improve the health of our environment or our public. And it is the first minimum step to be able to then take meaningful action. And I'm sorry to say, under the previous government, they failed to take meaningful action. Between 2021 and 2023, Dewsbury and Buckley experienced a massive number of sewage spills, totalling 4,604 incidents and a total duration of a staggering 28,383 hours, or approximately 3.25 years. Does my right honourable friend agree with me and my constituents that the privatisation of the water industry has been a total and abject failure, causing significant harm to our environment, public health and wildlife? And
Order. The honourable gentleman will know that interventions need to be brief, should not be pre-prepared and read out from a script. Shadow Secretary of State.
May I thank the honourable gentleman and say to him he, in fact, has just lined up the next paragraph of my speech. It's extraordinary. Because this improved knowledge must lead to action. I'll come to him in due course. I have said, in fairness, this is their debate, and I will give them the respect that the Liberal Democrats deserve for this Opposition Day debate. This improved knowledge must lead to action. And as I'm delighted that the Secretary of State acknowledged one of the most tangible improvements in the last decade is just a few metres away under our feet, the Thames Tideway Tunnel. Sadly, the Secretary of State didn't have the generosity of spirit to acknowledge the role that the Conservative government played in this, because this multi-billion-pound infrastructure project announced and delivered by the Conservative government is already stopping 500,000 tonnes of sewage flowing into the River Thames since it started operating in February. And over time, the 16-mile pipe is expected to stop 95% of sewage spills that previously would have polluted the River Thames. This is meaningful action that is already making a real difference to our nation's capital, built on the data that some laugh at. And I ask, genuinely, where is Labour's plan for more of this? Because in government, we also wanted to clear up the water industry and our environment. It was the Environment Act under the last government that gave stronger powers to regulators and imposed strict demands for tackling pollution. We set legally binding targets to improve water quality and availability and to reduce nutrient pollution. We rolled out catchment-sensitive farming to all farms in England. We stepped up the requirements for investment, including investment from water companies and storm overflow improvements. Now, after 14 years in opposition, the Labour Party should have come into office with a plan of what more needs to be done to fix this century-old problem. And what is more, set that plan in action last summer with energy and gusto. I know the right honourable gentleman is chuntering from a sedentary position. May I say what a delight it is to actually see him in the chamber. Normally he's running frit from farmers. But instead we have had an underwhelming trickle, a review, yet another talking shop forum that hasn't done anything other than have a meeting, and a bill that has, as we described it during the passage of the bill, set out much of what was already happening. And as with every other part of this government, they had no plan, and they are now trying to come up with one. So, for example, I'll give way in a moment. For example, when the Secretary of State recently pledged to clean up Lake Windermere so that only rainwater flows into it, it was a laudable ambition. Who can disagree with that ambition? But he gave no time frame and no plan for delivering this vision. I have also visited the honourable member for Westmorland's constituency. I met local residents, I met farmers, something I don't think the Secretary of State managed to do, and I met business owners recently. Well, they do notice, and they are not holding their breath for action, because rather like his no farming policy, it's all talk and no action. A significant amount of their supposedly groundbreaking water legislation, including monitoring, blocking bonuses and fines, was already brought in by the previous government, and sadly they rejected our amendment to maintain the important water restoration fund to protect waterways, including chalk streams, many of which are in my constituency. I genuinely hope they will reconsider this. I'm very happy to give way if the Honourable Lady is in fact going to support and carry on our work on this. Delighted.
I obviously never wish to be impolite, and I won't be now. But I think we'll find what our argument was with the Water Restoration Fund was that it didn't need primary legislation to happen. What actually has happened since then, Madam Deputy Speaker, is everyone who's been successful in applying for the Water Restoration Fund has been contacted, and the money has indeed already been offered. So I think maybe the Right Honourable Lady's information might be slightly out of date.
Yeah. Well, I'm delighted to hear that. And can I gently suggest that was not the response that she gave when we were debating this and we were pressing her to put it in the bill. It is precisely because we have done our job of scrutinising the bill, trying to improve it, that I'm delighted that she has now put that into action. Another example, I'm happy to take an intervention from her if she's going to do this as well. We also put forward an amendment to limit the amount of debt that water companies could accumulate, as well as an amendment to protect bill payers. Sadly, both of those were rejected. Perhaps the Honourable Lady, she's welcome to intervene on me if she's in fact doing that. Is she doing that? No intervention. Well, we have not got that commitment, but I'm genuinely happy to give way to her because I want to improve her own legislation.
happy to offer. I think what you'll find my response to that is part of looking at levels of debt is something that is part of the Water Commission. That's a conversation that the spokesperson will know, because we had this conversation, Shadow Minister had this many times across in the Bill Committee, that is part of what the Commission is looking at. And I gently also remind her that much as I accept that she's so super keen for us to achieve everything she failed to in 9 months, she had 14 years.
Wow. Where's the energy? Where's the gusto? This is almost... The rewriting of history is almost... It seems to be a theme this week for the government, but there we go. That's a little bit delicate, isn't it, for the Labour backbenchers with the discussions this week. So we banned bonuses for the bosses of water companies that have committed criminal breaches, and water companies that illegally pollute our rivers can be prosecuted, making it clear that polluters will pay for damage to our natural environment. I note, and indeed I hope, the Minister will, in her wind-up, answer the point that my honourable friend from Bridgewater made about the fines being ring-fenced for local areas, and also the important point that my honourable friend for Beaconsfield made about the amendment she brought forward to the Water Special Measures Bill, but the Secretary of State, as his nervous tick, merely fell back on whatever they say about the past, rather than actually setting out his vision for the future. I know, I can always tell what I'm getting to, and bless him. We quadrupled water company inspections and set in place a plan to have 4,000 inspections a year by April 2025, increasing to 10,000 a year from April 2026. Will this government commit, in a moment, will this government commit to that vital work, or will the Chancellor cut the DEFRA budget so starkly that these are cancelled? I give way.
The stunning River Derwent running through Derby, but it has been polluted by sewage 2,675 times in 2024, lasting over 15,000 hours. And I would invite the honourable member to see whether she'd take any responsibility for halving, for cutting the budget by half of the Environment Agency, leaving them without the powers and the resources to combat this kind of sewage.
Rural constituency MP who defends the activities of the Environment Agency, because I have to say some of the disappointments that local residents have had, particularly in my part of the world, with the Environment Agency, means that there is real work to do that. But I'm still answering her first intervention. Is that, of course, she is relying on data. This is exactly the point. And again, I come back to the point, and I'm trying to be constructive and collegiate in the way that we're dealing with this. We all... I mean, the public will hear the laughter. This is what they don't understand. I'm trying to be constructive in that we managed to collect the data. We did have significant infrastructure investment in the Thames tidal pipe, as I've explained. But also there is more to do, and I have always said that at this dispatch box. And so we genuinely will support constructive efforts by the government. It's why we scrutinise their legislation so carefully. It's why we put perfectly proper amendments forward to the Water Special Measures Bill. I'm delighted that the government has taken our suggestion on the Water Restoration Fund so seriously and enacted that. But we have to have this conversation in a way that is not conducted with the quite the emotional distress that the Secretary of State seems to be in at the moment. Now, the Liberal Democrats know the scale of the challenge, since, of course, there was a Liberal Democrat water minister in place for a large part of the coalition government. That fact seems to have been missed in their motion today. I'm sure it's just an oversight. We agree with them that they want to see even more progress with the Blue Flag scheme. Since 2010, the number of designated bathing waters has increased. We have seen a significant improvement in water quality ratings, with more water rated as excellent or good, and an increase in Blue Flag beaches. But as a proud coastal MP, I want to see many more Blue Flag beaches like Mablethorpe and Sutton-on-Sea on our glorious Lincolnshire coastline, and I will, of course, support meaningful efforts to achieve that. But if I may, I would just ask for a point of clarity from the Liberal Democrats, because I think in 2023 they called for a ban on bank holiday sewage discharges. Again, a laudable ambition. But then I think it was pointed out to the Right Honourable Gentleman that his policy would result in burst water pipes and sewage backing up into people's homes. And so my question to the Liberal Democrats is that when we put forward these laudable ambitions, as indeed we all want to see them, please will they ensure that in their own policy making that they are not dealing with unintended consequences, including, as I say, sewage flowing back up into people's homes. And I'm going to finish on this point, Madam Deputy Speaker. Again, I emphasise we all care about the quality of our waterways. As we showed in the Water Special Measures Bill, we will work constructively across the House to improve our waterways and the legislation put forward by the government. I am proud to be leading the policy renewal work for farming, food, fishing, environment and water for the Conservative Party with my excellent shadow ministerial team, my honourable friends for Epping Forest and Keighley and Ilkley. We will be watching and scrutinising the government's work on water carefully. And the promises that the Secretary of State is making now will be remembered by our constituents, by colleagues across the House and by voters, as I'm afraid his promises are remembered by our farmers.
Julia Buckley.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I thank the Liberal Democrats for securing this important debate. They're asking the government today really for three key commitments: to take urgent action to end the sewage scandal, to provide greater protection against sewage dumping, and to ensure the public knows when rivers are clean and safe. And I've got some great news for the Liberal Democrats, because we've pretty much delivered all of those already. This Labour government acted incredibly urgently to bring forward the Water Special Measures Bill. It was one of our first pieces of legislation, straight in the first King's Speech, and becoming law in February of this year, to end the disgraceful behaviour of the water companies. And the legislation does exactly what it says on the tin. It puts our disgraceful water companies into special measures. Just like a school that fails its Ofsted exam, the government is wading in to ramp up regulation and enforcement of these companies. We'll be ensuring that their focus is back on consumers, their experience, their service level and their bills. So we've been ensuring additional regulation. The Liberal Democrats talked about lack of resourcing, but we heard today, and in the bill, it's very clear that the polluter will pay, and the water companies' fines themselves will come back into the EA to put the much-needed resourcing where it should be. I will give way.
To my humble friend for giving way. We heard from the Shadow Secretary of State some bemoaning about the laughter from these benches. I think the laughter from these benches was at the idea that people in this country should be grateful for the condition that we've been left the waterway by the benches opposite. Does my humble friend share that the amusement on these benches at that ridiculous thought?
The Shadow Secretary of State will know that she cannot intervene on an intervention, which was far too long, so I think we'll go back to Julia Buckley.
I thank you for the intervention, which was very amusing. But more importantly is the impact. I will continue. More important is the impact of our Water Special Measures Bill to ban bonuses where high standards are not met for protecting environmental...
Gloria Atkins.
Labour backbenchers should know this by now. The honourable gentleman fell into error, I'll be kind, fell into error by mischaracterising the comment I made about him and his colleague next to him laughing during the course of my speech when I was talking about the importance of data monitoring. It was not in any way...
Order!
Sorry.
The Shadow Secretary of State will know that was not a point of order, that was a point of debate. Perhaps we'd best return to Julia Buckley.
I thank the Madam Deputy Speaker for her excellent chairmanship. Our important bill has not just banned bonuses, but finally introduced criminal liability. So finally, those tougher penalties, which will mean that chief execs and senior leadership can end up in prison for up to 2 years. And the mandatory electronic sensors that we've heard about, which monitor the overflows in real time. So it's objective data that is measured in real time and, crucially, because it's an important question from the Liberal Democrats, available to the public. I must make progress, forgive me. And we've forced the water companies to deliver on their 5-year investment plans for sustainable urban drainage to rectify the inadequate infrastructure which has not kept up with the capacity over the last 30 years. In Shropshire, where I represent, that means £500 million additional investment to rectify our sewage drainage over the next 5 years. Now, I've only been an MP for a few months, but in this short time, I am proud of the government's swift and decisive action to immediately curtail the excesses of the privatised water industry. In my own constituency of Shrewsbury, we have significant sewage outflows in the town centre as the beautiful River Severn completely loops round the centre with over 30 combined sewage overflows. And underground we have Victorian inadequate infrastructure which has been ignored under our cobbled streets. The Water Special Measures Bill couldn't come quickly enough for my constituents in Shrewsbury and quite specifically has already delivered all 3 asks of the Lib Dems in today's debate. We have taken urgent action. Yep. We have legislated to protect consumers against sewage dumping. And we have ensured the public have the information they need. There is no question of this government's commitment to clean up water. The only question is why the Liberal Democrats voted against this important bill.
And Mathew.
We didn't go over.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the pollution of rivers is an issue that strikes close to home for many of us. Just November last year, Wessex Water will fine £500,000 for pumping raw sewage into Clacka's Brook, a small river rising in Bromham and flowing through 5 miles through Melksham in my constituency. This incident resulted in the deaths of over 2,000 fish, including all aquatic life within a 1 kilometre radius of the leak. The systems in place simply cannot handle the pressure brought to bear by the increasing volatility in rainfall levels seen in recent times. I've also been to visit the home of one of my constituents in West Lavington, where a manhole had been lifted from its housing as a result of a downpour. Toxic sewage then polluted a nearby chalk stream, damaging its unique ecosystem, home to a variety of species, including trout. These kinds of incidents cannot be allowed to persist. The current antiquated piping system does not satisfy modern demand. Water companies must update and future-proof these streams. We do need them to do it now, and I've been pleased to see that Wessex Water, credit where credit's due, invest £2 million into a sewage storage facility in Bradford-on-Avon to ensure that they can mitigate increased pressure on sewage pipes. However, it's clear that more must be done to protect our vital aquatic ecosystems. We must also be clear that it's not just a problem for water companies. Developments in farming practices have led to detrimental impacts on both soil quality and river health. Acreage dedicated to the production of maize trebled between 1990 and 2000, making it one of the UK's fastest growing crops. However, maize allows for high levels of surface runoff, causing soil degradation and the pollution of our rivers, making it one of the most damaging crops. The rise in intensive poultry units is another area of concern. Chicken manure contains far higher levels of phosphates than other farmed animals, thus starving fish and river plants of oxygen. Runoff from chicken farms, or indeed from fields spread with chicken manure, is catastrophic to our waterways. So yes, we must expect better from our water companies. Investments into infrastructure must rise with the demands of the modern world. However, we should also approach the issue of river pollution in a... Please.
Thank you, Deputy Madam Speaker. Would the honourable member acknowledge that actually some water companies have been investing heavily, and in my area in Stroud, Severn Trent have actually invested £25 million to stop overflow of sewage into our River Frome, and together with natural flood management from our district council, we have actually made the rivers cleaner, and as a keen swimmer, I'm very grateful to that. So would you acknowledge that?
Thank you for that intervention. And as I've just said, in Bradford and Avon, similar investments have been made, and credit where credit is due. But if I can move on to the end of my speech, which is referring to these issues about farming, which are important. So what I'm saying is we should also approach the issue of river pollution in a far more holistic manner, acknowledging varied factors, including agriculture, that contribute to just 14% of our waterways being in good health. Thank you.
Catherine Fookes. Madam Deputy Speaker. Well, we've had a wonderful surf around the UK this afternoon and our rivers, lakes and seas. And every single one of us in this House will have a waterway in our constituency. And we have all had to endure the worst impacts of 14 years of negligence and failure that almost killed some of our rivers. The Wye and the Usk, which run through my constituency of Monmouthshire, are two fantastic examples of waterways that have been sadly affected for too long. Runoff from agriculture, liquid waste from industry, sewage resulting from inadequate investment by failing water companies have all added up to increasing phosphate levels in our rivers. Tests in the Usk have in the past shown scarily high levels of E. coli in the water, which made it unsafe for bathing and stopped local people from enjoying the river in the ways that they should be able to, and in the ways that the Secretary of State mentioned earlier, splashing through streams and jumping into the sea. We should all be able to swim and kayak and canoe without fear of nasty infection. Tourism has suffered, as have those businesses like those run by Angela Jones, whose livelihood depends on the river in Monmouthshire. I want to pay tribute to the brilliant citizen scientists and campaigners in my constituency who tirelessly work to save our local rivers. Friends of the River Wye, Save the River Usk, and the Wye Catchment Partnership. These members of our community, up and down the whole of the UK, are testing and monitoring the rivers for pollution and coming up with innovative cross-border solutions. The good news is that this government has paid attention to people in Monmouthshire and all over England and Wales. The last government had an unfunded, pie-in-the-sky action plan for the River Wye, which only looked at England. Water flows across borders, and I am so pleased that the two Labour governments in Westminster and in Cardiff have, as the Secretary of State so eloquently mentioned already, made progress and put £1 million of funding into the River Wye so we can clean it up once and for all. And of course, the Water Special Measures Act has made extraordinary progress on making sure polluters are held to account. It will strengthen the powers of Ofwat so it can better hold water companies to account. It will bring tough criminal charges against those who break the law. This is only the beginning. We know there is much more to do, and the Cunliffe review that is upcoming will help us do this. But I'm so proud that the Labour government has achieved more in 9 months than the previous government did in 14 years, and notably more than the Liberal Democrats also did in coalition.
Ros Savage.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. My constituency of the South Cotswolds contains the source of the Thames, so in theory I could row from my constituency to this House. I would like to celebrate the opening of the Thames Tideway Tunnel, as referenced by the Secretary of State earlier. Back in 2013, I was campaigning for this tunnel, which included frowning at a sewage outflow under Putney Bridge, so you could say that I've been in the excrement for quite some time. Sadly, the situation has not improved. during those 12 years in between. Just this morning, I had a very impressive young man, Ben Thornbury, in my office to commend him for his work cleaning up the River Avon in Malmesbury. Sadly, let no good deed go unpunished. He had picked up sepsis from the pollution in the river, and I'm grateful to say made a full recovery, but still, it's a sign of the times. So, surprisingly maybe, I would like to use a word rarely heard in the context of the water industry, hope. I would like to highlight some ways in which good things are happening, largely at the grassroots. First of all, citizen science. There were 80 pollution incidents reported by citizens just in my constituency, in Wiltshire and Gloucestershire, in last year. And often citizen science can highlight pollution incidents up to 3 days before official sources of information.
Give way.
I will give way.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. In my constituency, I'm very lucky to have friends of the River Frome and Frome Families for the Future who would do lots of citizen science in testing the river. But does my honourable friend agree with me that actually we shouldn't be relying on these groups to test the water quality, and we need to empower and resource the Environment Agency to be doing this, so we can't just rely on areas that are lucky enough to have these kind of groups in place?
I thank my honourable friend for her intervention, and I do completely agree that although I commend the efforts, the grassroots efforts, this is not their job. So I'm delighted to hear from the Secretary of State that we are soon to have real-time reporting on water pollution, and look forward to seeing the visible and smellable results of that. I would also like to say it is the Earthwatch Water Blitz this weekend, so you all still have time maybe to get your water testing kits and to do your own bit of citizen science. Secondly, again, applauding local efforts, especially the Malmesbury Rivers Valley Trust and the Cotswold Lakes Trust. They're doing such exemplary work, taking care of our waterways and our wetlands in the South Cotswolds. I would also like to recommend to members across the House that we use our power to convene, to bring together people around these issues. In the South Cotswolds, we recently held 2 very fruitful summits, one on the Gloucestershire side, one on the Wiltshire side, bringing people together around the issue of flooding that yielded a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of expertise, and a lot of actionable solutions. But as my honourable friend has already mentioned, we cannot leave it all to the grassroots. This is a deeply dysfunctional water industry that we have in this country, and we need to get upstream of these problems to the source. I will give way.
Thank you for that. Intervene. We've been hearing about all this, the monitoring and 1 hour and the huge amount of discharges. May I tell you, we don't have any of that information in Scotland. It is not a requirement for Scottish Water to release that. And the SNP government are not making any steps to do so. We have no idea what the extent of the problem is, but we know it's substantial. So I would like my friend to back me in supporting the calls for the Scottish Government to release the same information you have in England. Thank you.
I thank my honourable friend for his intervention and would be more than happy to back his calls for an equivalent system in Scotland. So finally, I would like to thank the government for everything that it is already doing around reforming the water industry, and look forward to seeing real results in our waterways. I would just like to add that while I welcome the Cunliffe review, I was disappointed to find out that the actual ownership of water companies is outside of its scope. If we are to get genuinely to the source of the problem, I will give way.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Sitting on the EFRA committee, we are making submissions as well to the Cunliffe Review, and I do not believe that ownership of water is outside. It is something that the Cunliffe Review will be looking at, the way water is owned, maybe not nationalisation, but certainly other methods of ownership.
I think that's very awkward.
I thank the honourable member for her intervention. That was not what I'd been led to believe from a round table with Sir John Cunliffe, but maybe I misunderstood. Because the truth is that the profit motive has no place in a vital public utility like the water industry. We are one of only 2 countries in the entire world that has a privatised water industry. Clearly, it is not working and needs to be reviewed.
Joe Morris.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and it's a pleasure to speak in such an important debate, particularly representing one of the most beautiful counties in England, the largest constituency in England, as the Lib Dem spokesman's already hinted at. And rivers define my constituency. They define the county that I grew up in, from the Tyne to the Coquet to the Allen Valleys, all the way to the River Reed. You cannot go through Out and Thumb without crossing or coming across rivers and communities named for them, that depend on them, that drive tourism, drive wildlife, that drive our local economies. Protecting those rivers is not just a luxury, it's not a nice to have, it's a fundamental duty for those of us who represent those communities. I'm incredibly proud to be the MP for a constituency that is so vibrant, so active, and that has got such fantastic grassroots campaigners, including Dr. Stephen Westgarth and the Clean Tyne campaign. Now, members opposite will be aware that Stephen Westgarth was at one point a Conservative County Council candidate. I do enjoy working cross-party with people, although the week before the local elections probably not quite so much as the week after. And I should at this point say that there is one retiring Green Party councillor in my constituency who I'd like to pay tribute to, Dr. Nick Morfitt, the councillor for Humshoff, who's done an excellent job, and despite running against me during the general election, was always very good company when I met him on the doorsteps. To go back to slightly hackneyed party politics, I do recognise quite how much the sewage issue gets hackles raised and confirms just how much the country had fallen into a state of stagnation and decline. During 2024, my constituency was polluted 3,991 times, lasting over 27,000 hours. Dumping sewage is not waste management, it's environmental destruction, environmental vandalism, particularly devastating in the rural northeast where so much tourism relies on it. And when the Minister comes to wind up, I know she's not in her place, but I hope she'll hear it, I do hope that she'll dwell on those communities that rely on it, particularly really isolated communities like those in Kielder, where they have to deal with the practicalities of living so sparsely. And I will often talk about Hexham having a very rural population. Now, when I go to Kielder, they will look at me coming from Hexham as if I've sort of come from Vegas. I was at a Kielder Parish Council meeting. It took an hour to get there. If one of the farmers is feeding her cows, she can't have a shower. That's the level of sparsity, the level of rurality that we're dealing with. So I would just urge the Minister, when she comes to her feet, to address that, and if she could come and meet with the Clean Tyne campaign to discuss the challenges that they face and the work they're doing to preserve some of the challenges we face on the Tyne, we massively appreciate it in my constituency.
Joy Morrissey.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's wonderful to follow the member for Hexham, who is also my parliamentary twin, as it were, with our names being so similar. We often get confusing letters of correspondence, and he must love it as much as I do, so it's wonderful to follow him in this debate. And the issue of sewage in our rivers is something, Madam Deputy Speaker, that is of great concern to my constituents in Beaconsfield, Marlow, and the South Bucks villages, and also to my parliamentary twin over there. And in my constituency, I've worked closely with local action groups in Little Marlow and Farnham Common to secure a planned sewage upgrade for the Little Marlow sewage treatment works through persistent lobbying of former Conservative ministers and now current Labour ministers. And I have repeatedly called for criminal sanctions against water company executives for breaches of their duties. But I have always said more needs to be done. In particular, I want to urge the Minister to again look at strengthening the protection for water sports. Exactly. Yeah. Earlier this year, I proposed 2 amendments to the Water Special Measures Bill. One to introduce criminal sanctions for water company bosses who fail to report discharge, and another to extend protections for water sports to match those for swimming waters. These are serious, meaningful changes needed to further strengthen our oversight of water companies and our waterways. In my constituency, we are rich in water sports along the Thames, and in particular, we have Marlow Rowing Club, Marlow Canoe Club, and the Upper Thames Sailing Club, just to name 3 wonderful examples. And our local schools regularly use the river for water sports. So my secondary schools are out on the Thames on a daily basis, rowing and using it, and it would just be a wonderful thing to have this incorporated into legislation to protect aquatic sports. I will get way.
Thank you all for giving way.
in my constituency of Harrogate and Knaresborough, we have the wonderful River Nid that runs through it. And similarly, there's paddleboarding, kayaking, and all sorts of wonderful things, including the Knaresborough bed race, which actually runs through the river at one point. Does she not feel regret that the Conservatives in the last government didn't take the steps she's outlining now?
Well, I appreciate that I have been lobbying for this for many years, and now that I am in opposition, I have been able to table my own amendments, Lib Dem style, and I was happy to have the Lib Dem spokesperson during the bill committee actually support and speak in support of my amendment. So that's great. I love that cross-party support, and learning from their wonderful example of taking the amendments forward when you're not in power, and that's fun. So it's enjoyable for us all. And so in the spirit of that, not the 42, but I did do 2. So, I'm working my way there. And I want to do water sports, and I want to see this move forward in any way possible, because I think it's so important for our rivers and the aquatic sports that we all benefit from and use. And for water sports, I want the same protection as bathing waters proposed in the water bills, and I would like to see this discharge from emergency overflows blocked within 1 mile radius of an area used for aquatic sports, particularly aquatic sports that are used for secondary schools and for children.
Will my honourable friend give way?
I will give way.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way, and she's making a very powerful speech about water sports, but does she agree with me that also angling is vitally important for our rivers as well? I met with members of the Farron Angling Society on the River Wey some weeks ago, and they were very concerned, obviously, about what pollution effects are going to have on the angling stocks, which is also vital for our rural life.
That's an important point. Angling is a very important sport that we should be protecting and making sure our waterways are clean. And the one way to know if your waterways are clean is by the aquatic life that comes back when a waterway is cleaned. And clubs in my constituency would really benefit from those changes and from that protection. And I would like to see this moving forward. And I hope that the minister will change his mind and adopt something very similar to my amendment. Feel free to take credit and pretend that it's your amendment, but or your changes. But I would really like to see this brought forward. And unfortunately, my proposals, my 2 amendments, were not accepted, but I will continue to press for them, Lib Dem style, at any opportunity I can possibly find, because I do believe that they would be good for the UK, and I believe that they would be good for our waterways. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, I hope the government will look seriously again at protecting water sports, and I would be delighted to work with the government or any party to practically develop the legislative steps needed to do so.
Matt Rodda.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak in this afternoon's debate. Can I declare an interest, as I have close relatives who work in the water sector, although in science rather than in the water industry. I would like to speak in favour of this, of the amended motion in the name of the Prime Minister and the Secretary of State and other ministers. Madam Deputy Speaker, our rivers have suffered from serious sewage pollution over many years, and I'm pleased that the government is now taking action to address this terrible problem. I want to discuss the nature of the action, but also to raise some important constituency matters. Madam Deputy Speaker, as I said, for far too long, water companies have ignored the concerns of residents, as we've heard this afternoon, and they've continued to pump sewage into our rivers, lakes and seas. Reading is particularly badly affected because it's downstream of many of those pumping outlet stations further up the Thames, as other colleagues have hinted at who come from the Thames Valley area. I strongly support, though, the measures taken by the government's Water Special Measures Act, which does tackle this, and this received royal assent on the 24th of February. And the Act will introduce tough new penalties, including imprisonment for water company executives when companies fail to cooperate or they obstruct investigations. It will also ban bonuses, notably for CEOs and for senior leaders within these companies, and that is unless very high environmental standards are met and consumers are protected and there's financial resilience within the company. The Act also notably will ensure that each emergency sewage overflow outlet will be independently monitored, as we heard earlier, which is a very important step forward. This will make it quicker and easier for regulators to investigate and punish wrongdoing. And the measures introduced will also increase transparency by requiring water companies to publish real-time data for all emergency overflows in England. Again, a clear and important step forward. In addition, Madam Deputy Speaker, we've heard earlier, and I had a colleague from the Select Committee mention some further details, about how the government has also commissioned the Cunliffe Review, which is another very important step forward in tackling these problems. And this will look in much greater detail into how companies are held to account for non-compliance, and indeed will look at a number of other matters. Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm very conscious of time, but I would like to raise some local examples of sewage pollution and other related matters with our waterways in the Reading area. And I have seen, and I've spoken about this previously during the debate on the bill, some appalling incidents of sewage pollution in my own area, including seeing a tributary of the Thames turn a lurid pale green after a sewage incident in Hampshire, which fed into Foundry Brook, which is a tributary of the Kennet, which ultimately flows into the Thames.
Will my honourable friend give way?
Of course I'll give way.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. On Friday, I'm going to be testing the water quality in Christchurch Harbour, because there we need a conservation policy as suggested by the Christchurch Harbour and Marine Society. I'm also concerned about the River Stour in my constituency. Does my honourable friend agree with me that the Environment Agency could set higher standards for water quality, and in so doing help to establish the data which shows where areas are falling short? And in that situation, I'm particularly concerned about the River Stour, but I know he too will have rivers that he's concerned about.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'm grateful for his intervention, and of course I would like to see further work being carried out by all agencies, and he makes a very good point about his river. In my own constituency, there are a number of rivers, both the Thames and the Kennet, and I was just about to say how many of these flow through heavily populated areas and through places where people enjoy walks by the river, as well as we heard earlier from the honourable member from, I'm terribly sorry, from Marlow, about the issue of people enjoying the river for rowing, for swimming and sailing and many other activities. I've also seen the way that sewage pollution can interfere with wildlife, and in one case saw some appalling, a stark, really appalling contrast between pollution that was really visible in the river, foam from sewage and other nitrate pollution, next to a kingfisher. And it's really sad to see the way that these beautiful rivers are polluted by this appalling outfalls. Of course I'll give one.
I'm very grateful for my honourable friend for giving way. He, like me, will receive hundreds of emails and bits of correspondence on the performance of Thames Water. Does he agree with me that that company in particular should take this bill as very much being put on notice, and that further action may follow if necessary in order to improve standards?
Speaker, right on cue, he's enticing me to the next section I wanted to talk about, which is general problems with Thames Water, which, as those of us who represent constituencies in the Thames Water area know, is an appalling company. I don't want to criticise individual members of staff, and the head office is in Reading in my constituency. Many people locally work there and they work hard, but the company is poorly managed in my experience, and I was going to mention a number of other incidents, including two delays to two incidents where water was cut off to large parts of Reading suburbs, and where residents are still waiting for compensation. I've had to write to Ofwat to ask them to investigate. I've had other incidents where a sinkhole has been created due to a water leak, which is causing severe distress to residents. I appreciate this isn't sewage, but it's part of the wider water provision network, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I hope is in scope of the debate. And in this case, residents are going to have to wait for concrete to be pumped into the chalk for the road next to their homes to be stabilised. I've seen a series of other problems with flooding and other concerns about watercourses not being maintained. So I do think there are wider problems, of course.
I apologise.
The time limit has been reached, and so I would suggest that perhaps the Honourable Member for Reading Central wanted to conclude his remarks before we had another intervention from Bournemouth. Pippa Heylings.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. We do welcome the Water Special Measures Act, and we do also urge the government to go further, particularly with regards to protection of chalk streams, which is really personal to me and many members across this House. I've campaigned for many years to stop the dumping of raw sewage and for better protection of our chalk streams, alongside campaign organisations Cam Valley Forum and the many local river action groups for the Mel, the Granta, the Shep, the Ree, the Wilbrahams, the Orwell and the Cherry Hinton Brook. Some progress has been made locally with a hard-won award of the designation of a bathing water designation for the Sheep's Green section of the River Cam, which has secured much-needed financing for clean actions by Anglian Water for the small sewage treatment work in Haysingfield, upstream. However, not all chalk streams that we have can have bathing water designation as this mechanism for protection, especially when they have to struggle and suffer with these overwhelmed small sewage treatment works that they have, as a result of the unprecedented housing growth and development in our area. And that's why I bemoan the fact that the Water Special Measures Act and the Planning and Infrastructure Bill do not get rid of the damaging automatic right to connect for developers, which means that water companies cannot say whether or not they have the capacity to manage sewage in their area. I will do.
I thank my right honourable friend. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. You talk about overwhelmed sewage works, etc. In my constituency of Harpenden and Beaconsfield, the Markgate Sewage Works has had 3,000 hours now of overflow non-stop, including sewage. That's into one of our precious chalk streams. So would the right honourable member also agree with me? That's why it's so important that we have this blue flag status, which has increased that responsibility and accountability of those companies that should not be taking these for granted.
Thank you, and I do agree with my honourable friend. Also, in my constituency of South Cambridgeshire alone, the rivers and streams were polluted by sewage 728 times in 2024, lasting over 9,700 years. And that's a disgraceful legacy of the former Conservative government. Yeah. And we do need the protection that my honourable friend has mentioned. We bemoan the fact that the Secretary of State and the government got rid of the Chalk Stream Recovery Pact. That is distressing to all of those who care for chalk streams, and that is why we need practical measures such as the blue flag status, and for rivers and chalk streams in a blue flag corridor in water catchments to have the kind of protections that they need. This would give the public confidence in water quality. It would enable regular water testing, biodiversity checks and better community involvement, boosting transparency.
I thank you for giving way. Statistics published last week show that Welsh Water, the supposedly not-for-profit Welsh Water Company, had the highest number of sewage discharges across the entire UK, despite charging some of the highest prices for its water in a country that has some of the lowest incomes in all of the UK. So will she agree with me that the Welsh Government must stop letting Welsh Water off the hook and take responsibility for its actions?
My honourable friend makes such a compelling argument for what is needed in terms of protection and accountability in Wales. We need this better protection for our chalk streams, unique habitats for nature. The Liberal Democrats will continue leading the fight against sewage scandal. We will continue standing up for nature, for our rivers, for our chalk streams, for us to enjoy them, for everyone and for future generations to come.
Claire Hazelgrove.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The future of our rivers, lakes and seas could not be more important, and not just for our generation, but for future generations too. But after 14 years of Conservative failure to act, indeed propped up for a time by the party opposite here as well, their future was looking lost at sea. I'm proud that taking action to clean up our rivers, lakes and seas and to hold failing water bosses to account through the new Water Special Measures Act formed one of the first acts by our new Labour government. And I was proud to serve on the Bill Committee. I know this issue is hugely important to fellow residents across the Filton and Bradley Stoke constituency. Locally, we care deeply about our nature, our environment and the future we are forging for future generations. Walks along the River Froome or the Bradley Brook should not only be safe and healthy, but enjoyable for all. Madam Deputy Speaker, our new Labour government inherited a broken water system, with record levels of sewage being pumped into our waterways in towns, villages and cities across the country and along our glorious coastlines. This has impacted health, tourism and how we see our places, declining and unloved by the previous government as profits only grew. This Labour government is taking action and will continue to turn the tide. What I do find remarkable is how little was actually done Not talked about, but done, when both parties opposite were in government together. Yet how willing they are to claim credit for the actions taken by this new Labour government, while also, confusingly, seemingly trying to say that not very much is being done. They can't have it both ways. Our Act has introduced new powers to ban the payment of unfair bonuses to water bosses who fail to protect our environment and to bring tough criminal charges against them personally if they break the law. The work of our dedicated ministers has also helped to open up over £100 billion of private sector investment to upgrade crumbling sewage infrastructure. On top of all this, Madam Deputy Speaker, I was also glad to hear the Secretary of State announce an independent water commission last autumn. This, the Cunliffe Commission, is the largest review of the water sector since privatisation. It is worth me mentioning, Madam Deputy Speaker, that anyone can contribute their views to the Commission until 11:59 p.m. tonight, including people at home and the parties opposite. Indeed. Listening, acting and thinking of future generations, this is quite clearly a new government. And our plan for change will build the infrastructure that Britain needs to clean up our rivers, lakes and seas for good. And I look forward to supporting this every step of the way.
Ellie Chowns.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I thank the Honourable Member for Westmorland and Lonsdale for bringing this important debate today. And as the Secretary of State, I think, said, we are all in furious agreement that the condition of our rivers, lakes and seas is an absolute scandal. I completely agree. It would, of course, as the Minister knows, be remiss of me not to point out that it's not just due to sewage, as another colleague mentioned. Agricultural pollution is a key factor in the condition of our rivers, lakes and seas, and we cannot fix the problem without addressing both of those together. But the subject today is sewage, so I will focus on that. Now, the motion in front of us today, I'm not against introducing a blue flag system for rivers and streams, but to be honest, it is just tinkering around the edges of a broken system. A shortage of flags, a shortage of targets is not the problem. Last year, the Environment Agency gave the water companies collectively a target of 40% reduction in sewage incidents. What did we have? A 30% increase. Monitoring and targets aren't enough if there is no meaningful action, no meaningful sanctions. And yet, I understand that all the water companies have criminal convictions totalling well over 1,000 between them. Some have over 100 convictions, but they are still getting away with it. And at the same time, bills are going up through the roof by an average of over 20% in a single year, even more than that for many constituents, including my own. And yet, it is the bill payers, not the shareholders, that are paying the costs. The financial costs, in terms of the dividends to shareholders and the interest on loans of the privatised water and sewage companies, just a moment, of England and Wales, average 35% of company revenue from customer bills. That is customer bill money going to pay the financial costs of the water companies, whereas in the case of Scottish Water, a publicly owned company which may have other problems, but financially those costs amounted to just 8% of revenue from consumer bills. I will give way.
I'm grateful for the member in giving way. In my constituency of Blackburn, raw sewage discharge increased by 75% in 2023. Yet there's plans to raise bills by 32% in the following 5 years. What's clear is that the British public are being ripped off. Will the member agree that whilst better regulation and investment rules may fix some problems, the only way to solve this problem is to bring the water supply back into public ownership?
I completely agree with the honourable member. That is precisely the thrust of my argument here. Over the last 3 decades, shareholders have extracted £83 billion in dividends. They've invested effectively less than nothing because the share capital and retained earnings in those companies is now less than it was at privatisation. The capital investment has been taken out of customer bills, and yet customers are still paying through the nose. Now, a professor at the University of Greenwich, I have his report here, has shown that the costs of the investment that are needed in the water industry would be much lower under public ownership than under private ownership. And yet,
the party opposite, unfortunately, is not willing to consider public ownership when it is clear that that is the only solution, ultimately, to have the control needed to ensure that this essential public utility works in the public benefit. Now, government has the power to bring failing companies into special administration via the High Court, but during the passage of the Water Special Measures Bill, the Minister said special administration must be a last resort, as it has significant consequences for a company's investors. This speaks volumes about who the government thinks our water industry is for. It is not for these so-called investors, actually extractors, which have taken out so many dividends paid for by debt while neglecting our infrastructure and killing our waterways with sewage. There should be significant consequences for them. The people of this country, the British people, don't want their water investable. They want it clean, reliable, affordable, and in public hands. Public ownership is the key element of the solution to the sewage scandal.
Parent Moon.
Muraz, Madam Deputy Speaker, as hard as it may be to believe, on Saturday I went surfing at Gwithian Beach, a beach well known to the honourable member from St Ives in my Camborne, Redruth and Hale constituency. I was invited to surf with the WAVE project, a national programme offering children with mental health challenges the chance to use the power of the ocean to lift spirits, build their confidence and chase away some demons. It was an incredibly rewarding experience overall, even for someone whose surfing skills were last on show over 30 years ago. But what was really sad was that when we arrived, I was informed that the only place that we could use was on the western edge of the beach. The rest of the beach was too polluted with sewage. Across the central and western area of Cornwall, 10% of all of the WAVE project sessions have to be cancelled due to sewage pollution. All along the north coast of my constituency, in Portreath, Porthtowan, Perranporth and St Agnes, which is the location of the head office of Surfers Against Sewage, we are regularly polluted. According to the Commons Library, in 2024, there were 142 spills at Portreath, lasting over 2,500 hours. In total, there were 975 spills last year in the Camborne, Redruth and Hale constituency, lasting for an estimated 8,847 hours. These numbers are shocking to me and my constituents, who have a right to clean bathing water and a safe natural environment. However, I'm delighted that this government is taking action through new, tougher penalties for water executives, a ban on bonuses for senior leadership failing to meet standards, mandatory monitoring and reporting, and a model for cost recovery to better resource the Environment Agency, whose funding was slashed under the Tories. While many discharges still go unpunished, we're acting to clean up the Conservatives' foul, stinking mess, while the Liberal Democrats carp from the sidelines, making cheap but transparent pre-local election political points, stating the blindingly obvious as though it was some sort of political revelation, and the indignation of a party that has never had to worry about actually making government policy. And it is under the Labour government that the Conservatives' sewage scandal will end.
Callum Miller.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I would like to thank my honourable friend for Westmorland and Lonsdale for leading this debate for the Liberal Democrats, and I refer the House to my declaration of interest as an office holder in the Water APPG. Madam Deputy Speaker, it is 1 day short of 9 months since the first Prime Minister's questions of this Parliament, and on that day it was my privilege to pose the Prime Minister his first question, and I asked him about the levels of sewage being pumped by Thames Water into the River Evenlode in my constituency. He said customers should not pay the price for mismanagement by water companies, and he added it falls to this government to fix the mess of that failure. And yet, since that date, Thames Water has pumped sewage into Evenlode for a further 1,050 hours, while Thames Water has hiked bills to my constituents by over 30% on the 1st of April. And so I regret that I cannot see the plan put forward by the government is yet working, and I urge it to work with we Liberal Democrats to go further and faster. For the problem is that pumping sewage into our rivers and waterways is now routine. Indeed, it is so routine that it happens even when there has been no excess rainwater or storms. On the River Ray, for example, there were 7.5 hours of sewage spilling on the 9th of April when there was no rain that day, nor had there been in the previous week. This so-called dry spilling shows that the regulatory arrangements are a joke. My constituents were shocked to learn from Lib Dem Freedom of Information requests that Ofwat had not issued a single fine to water companies for their management of sewage treatment since 2021. In the last year, I have joined local residents and campaigners to participate in citizen science projects with the Even Load Catchment Project and River Watch to look at the quality of our water. On every measure, the rivers Even Load, Ray and Cherwell are severely contaminated. And yet, at the same time, the Thames Water is failing its domestic customers in my constituency. These include Mark Hamilton and Garden City Kidlington, who purchased pumps to try to keep sewage out of his and his elderly neighbour's home, but they were not enough. Or Colin Fletcher in Blaydon, who had sewage flood into his garden in September and still awaits a repair from Thames Water. Or Ros Fangopoulos in Chesterton, who saw sewage lap against her house walls and was left with faeces and toilet paper in her garden when the water receded. Or Martin Johnson in Yarnton, who could not use his toilet as it routinely overflowed into his home with sewage and now has a tanker stationed next to his house, loudly pumping 24/7, while Thames Water takes months to agree a sewer repair. In short, Madam Deputy Speaker, we have a company that pollutes our rivers and waterways and the homes and gardens of its customers, while all the time rewarding handsomely its executives and spending an increasing share of bill payers' money to service excessive debt. The Prime Minister told me his government would fix this mess, but I regret that the Water Special Measures Bill does not go nearly far enough. We need a powerful, effective and public-interested Clean Water Authority to clean up the Water Companies Act.
John Pearce.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I'd like to thank the Honourable Member for Westmorland and Lonsdale for bringing this debate. I thought it might be helpful to give some context to the debate, and it doesn't start with the 14 years of failure of the last Conservative government that we've heard so much about. I actually want to talk about the 1980s, where, gripped by ideological fervour rather than the national interest, the Thatcher and Major governments set off on a sales binge of our strategic assets and infrastructure, leaving us all these years later almost uniquely exposed to global events amongst the G7. Only 2 weeks ago, this government recalled Parliament to save British Steel, a vital strategic asset, not just for our economy, but for our security and our defence. The Conservatives fragmented British Rail, which this government is now taking back into public control piece by piece. And most prescient to today's debate, they privatised our water, not into a market of competing firms, but into a private monopolies, shielded from scrutiny and driven by dividends. In selling off the family silver, those governments wreaked havoc on our public services. But being generous to those governments, at least they had a vision, which is more than can be said of the last 14 years of the Conservatives. For 14 years, the Conservatives were asleep at the wheel, and sadly, for 5 of those years, the Lib Dems were snoring away quite happily in the passenger seat. While raw sewage poured into our rivers, the Lib Dems and the Conservatives allowed cash to pour into the pockets of the wealthy through shareholder payouts and executive bonuses. While the Environment Agency cried out for resources, the Conservatives and the Lib Dems cut its funding by half. So what was the consequence, Madam Deputy Speaker? Well, in High Peak, we saw, just before the election, 1,653 times sewage pumped into our rivers. That's into the River Wye, the River Ethrow, the River Noe, the River Doe and Blackbrook, equating to a sewage spill every 5 hours. This is a damning indictment on the failures of successive governments. By contrast, Madam Deputy Speaker, this Labour government has passed the Water Special Measures Act, with criminal liability now for company executives who obstruct investigations. We've banned their bonuses, and we've given regulators the power to recover the costs of enforcement, ensuring polluters, not taxpayers, foot the bill, and we've mandated real-time public reporting of sewage spills. This is only the start. We know wider reform is needed, and that is why we've launched the largest review of the water sector since privatisation. We know the size of the challenge, Madam Deputy Speaker, to halt the decline, and we are the only party with a serious plan to do so.
Edward Morello.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. In West Dorset, we are proud of our natural environment, but it is a pride that is undermined by the relentless dumping of raw sewage in our waterways. In 2024, there were 4,196 sewage spills in West Dorset. Across our rivers and coastlines, that added up to more than 48,000 hours of raw sewage discharge. In 2019, just 4 of the 36 monitored water bodies in West Dorset were rated as having a good ecological status, and while this all happened, water company executives have paid themselves £51 million in pay and bonuses. And it's our communities who pay the price. West Dorset's economy relies heavily on tourism. In 2022, tourism brought in over 300 million to our local area, supporting more than 5,200 jobs.
Will the honourable member give way?
Of course I will.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. Chichester Harbour in my constituency is the largest recreational boating harbour in the whole of Europe, but the damage being done to its ecosystem is stark. A recent study by the Clean Harbour Partnership found 105 pharmaceuticals, pesticides and also recreational drugs in the water, with 100 times the amounts being found directly after a sewage spill. Does my honourable member agree that tourism for areas such as his and mine are incredibly important, that we have clean water to be able to deliver it?
I absolutely agree. And in fact, as I said, 5,200 jobs in West Dorset. Those are hundreds of families who depend on visitors choosing to come to places like Lyme Regis and West Bay and Burton Bradstock and Abbotsbury and any one of the numerous beautiful towns and villages that we have. But how can those visitors do that with confidence when there is a real risk that they will arrive to find sewage warnings at the beach, when residents and tourists alike have to check an app to see whether or not the water is safe to swim in? In West Dorset, we're lucky to have some of the UK's rare chalk streams that have been mentioned already, including the rivers Piddle and Froome, Wraxall Brook, West Compton. These streams are home to delicate ecosystems and species like the Atlantic salmon, which is in worrying decline. As it stands, even when new homes are built near these rivers, water companies do not have to be formally consulted. Making water companies statutory consultees on new housing developments is basic common sense. It would mean proper planning, proper accountability, and the chance to avoid even more pressure on the already failing network. The Liberal Democrats have been clear. We want stronger rules. We want tougher enforcement. We want water companies to take responsibility and reinvest in the communities they have neglected. We're calling for the introduction of the blue flag status for rivers and chalk streams, just like we have for our best beaches. This would mean clear standards of cleanliness, proper testing and consequences when companies fall short. It would also help the public to understand that when a river is clean and safe, and not just when it's been tested. We will also welcome the speeding ticket fines that the government has introduced, automatic penalties for when water companies break the rules, but those fines need to be ring-fenced. They need to go straight back into the communities that have been affected, places like West Dorset, to fix the infrastructure, restore habitats and protect the public. We need action, we need proper regulation, and we need a government that will support rural communities.
Amanda Hack.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Secretary of State for his opening remarks and the speed within which our government is implementing these vital changes. And getting an opportunity to speak again on an issue that matters to me and my constituents of North West Leicestershire is a welcome one. Sewage and pollution featured in many discussions on the doorstep, and it was one of my personal pledges to my community, and it will continue to be so until the improvements from the Water Special Measures Bill is felt. In my community, I regularly check in with those people who've been adversely affected by sewage outflows. I know how much this impacts them day to day. I also know how long it has taken for some of the issues to resolve. For example, a sewage case in my constituency recently ended with Severn Trent offering an enforcement undertaking giving the Trent Rivers Trust £600,000. That will support the restoration of the habitat and the natural environment. But it took 2 years to get here, an outcome from such a significant spill, which has been unsurprisingly, really, since 2010, under the watch of the coalition government, the Environment Agency budget was cut in half, leaving them without the necessary tools and funding to fight the skyrocketing sewage discharges. My constituents are angry and have every right to be. I've said this before in this House, and I will say it again. In 2023, sewage poured into our waterways in North West Leicestershire for 15,000 hours, a 54% increase from the previous years. What a legacy. And still, the Lib Dems voted against the Water Special Measures Bill, a bill that will provide the largest investment in water infrastructure in history, the bill which will ban unfair bonuses on polluted water bosses, and a bill that will help to clean up our rivers, lakes and seas. Labour are the party fixing this mess, and I was proud to serve on the Water Special Measures Bill Committee, and even prouder to vote for the bill. And it's just the start. Our government has commissioned Sir John Cunliffe to undertake a review of the water sector, and if you're quick, you can get your response in by tonight. Sir John Cunliffe, in his statement upon being asked to undertake the review, said his first job in the civil service 45 years ago, he worked on the industrial pollution of water, a time when the UK was generally regarded as the dirty man of Europe. As a child...
James Nash.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. I am a neighbour of hers in Rushcliffe, and she will know that in its PR19 plan, Severn Trent received an £18 million reward for the quality of its plan. But in Surface Against Sewage 2025 Water Quality Report, it says that it failed to meet its targets every year in that period. Despite this, its PR24 plan has been rewarded £93 million. Does she agree with me that it's vital that Severn Trent, which serves both our constituents, is held to account properly in the PR24 period?
I thank my honourable friend for his intervention, and Severn Trent is the company that serves both of our communities, and yes, they do have to do their bit to clean up our waterways. I was a child of the 80s. I know you can't believe that. I grew up by the seaside, and I remember the impact our polluted seas had on our local community. But I saw the clean-up, the changes that made. But we're back to that place where our families can't enjoy the seaside, can't enjoy our waterways. Sadly, after 14 years, our communities are devastated by the water quality. So I was proud to vote for a bill that will bring criminal charges against persistent law breakers and the introduction of severe and automatic fine for offences. I was proud to vote for independent monitoring of every outlet, ensuring there's an unprecedented level of transparency so the public can hold water company bosses to account. That's the difference a Labour government can make, and I will support our amendment.
Alison Griffiths.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm pleased to be able to speak here today to bring the attention of this House to the concern of my constituents in Bognor Regis and Littlehampton on the continuing discharge of raw sewage into our local water bodies and seas. In Bognor Regis and Littlehampton, we saw 529 such discharges in 2024 from just 14 storm outflow points. These had a combined duration of over 6,200 hours, and it is simply not acceptable. It poses a serious threat not only to public health and the environment, but also to our local tourism and marine economy, which so many in my constituency depend upon. We must act decisively to improve our ageing water infrastructure, enforce stricter regulations and demand transparency from our water companies, from Ofwat and the Environment Agency. I will give way.
Richard Ford.
I'm grateful she mentions Ofwat. Last August, Ofwat recommended penalties for 4 water companies. Last August, Ofwat recommended penalties for 4 water companies of £168 million. So far, not one penny has been actually collected by Ofwat. Would she agree that Ofwat needs to be scrapped?
Alison Griffiths.
Thank you for your intervention. I don't agree with your diagnosis, no, but I do agree that those fines need to be collected and distributed. So just moving on. The other issue that has been identified in my constituency, and I imagine that it is a wider issue too, is that of illegal misconnections and cowboy builders. And we must introduce some crackdowns that address those issues, because without addressing that, we won't get the results we need. Constituents need to know what is being done to stop them. And since being elected, I've had constructive engagement with Southern Water and the Environment Agency, both with their local team and with their head office. Having visited Ford wastewater treatment works and done a shift with the Misconnections team in Bognor Regis, I know that work is being done to upgrade the network. But this is an issue that requires a strategic cross-agency approach, one that considers the serious impact on flood resilience and sewage discharges of the government's continued pursuit of house building on our floodplains. When schools in my constituency are taking children to the beach and being told they cannot swim in the sea, that isn't just disappointing, it's disgraceful. It's not the legacy, Madam Deputy Speaker, we want to leave the next generation. We owe them better.
Which brings us to the front bench contributions. Charlie Maynard.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm delighted to be speaking today on the issue of how we can fix our broken water and sewage sector and get serious about cleaning up our rivers and lakes. And I thank my honourable friend for Westmorland and Lonsdale for bringing this debate. My constituency of Witney in West Oxfordshire has really borne the brunt of the sewage scandal. We've got many beautiful rivers flowing through it. We have the Thames that bisects it, we have the Windrush and the Evenlode and the Shilbrook to the north, we have the Ock to the south, and they are all heavily and frequently polluted. I welcome the calls from colleagues today to introduce a new blue flag status so that we can guarantee a river is clean enough to swim in. This would help it restore people's confidence in their swimming and the bathing place at Witney would be a fantastic example, just north of Early's Mill, where generations of people have spent their summers swimming and no longer do. That we now know what a car crash our sewage network is thanks to so many campaigners who have gone to so much trouble on their own time and often their own money to bring this to our attention. And at the top of that star is WASP, so Windrush Against Sewage Pollution. That's Professor Peter Hammond, it's Ash Smith, it's Vaughan Lewis, and it's Jeff Toombs, who have worked tirelessly for the last 5 years to really highlight what has gone wrong. So many thanks to them and all the other citizen scientists in my constituency and beyond who have done so much to bring this to national attention. And we owe them all a huge debt of gratitude. I'm going to focus today on the failures of regulation, specifically Ofwat's failures. Ofwat are responsible for holding water companies accountable against the terms of their operating licence. DEFRA has oversight over Ofwat, and DEFRA sets the policy framework and provides strategic guidance to Ofwat on key environmental and social policies. Ofwat is clearly, as many people have already said in this chamber, failing on pollution. So, Environment Agency's own data shows that in 2024, Thames Water discharged raw sewage of almost 300,000 hours, 50% up on its 2023 sewage dumping of 196,000 hours. That's well known. Ofwat is also failing to enforce financial viability. So, Thames Water, which serves my constituency, just like every other water company in the country, has to have 2 investment-grade credit ratings. It hasn't had that for nearly a year now. Now, it's been beaten with limp celery, but that's about it. So it does have 19 billion of debt, headed quite possibly towards 23 billion of debt, and it has cash flows of just 1.2 billion. That obviously makes no financial sense. But yet, Thames Water is allowed to breach this rule with impunity. Now, no doubt, other water companies and companies in other sectors take note of what has been allowed by them and says, well, we can cross that line too. In water and in other regulated sectors. How is that good news? That introduces moral hazard, which does enormous damage to our country. And who are the ones who are ultimately paying the cost of all this debt and the enormous interest and advisory fees that go with it? Of course, it's the bill payers. So that's one thing. Ofwat then fails to provide value for money. As per the Water Industry Act 1991, Ofwat has a statutory duty to protect the interests of consumers and to protect the economy and efficiency on the part of water companies. As WASP recently published note on water companies' capital project costs, the costs that water companies are proposing are extraordinary. They're in some cases almost an order of magnitude higher than those in comparator companies in places like, well, companies in countries such as the USA and Denmark. Why is this? Why is this being allowed to happen? Why are our costs so much greater? Is it because our regulatory capital value pricing model is based off asset values and therefore gives an incentive to water companies to boost their asset bases? And they do this by extraordinarily long depreciation periods for network assets such as pipes, which were installed 50 years ago, but some have got depreciation periods of 100 years and are leaking like sieves. It also gives them an incentive to pour really, really expensive concrete. So why is it that something that you can build in Denmark costs 8 times the price over here? And why has, say, Oxford Sewage Treatment Works gone from 40 million to more than 400 million in terms of the planned spend in the last 4 years? What sort of inflation is that? Ofwat fails to provide fair pricing. Water companies have a requirement to demonstrate fairness, transparency and affordability to customers, which again Ofwat is supposed to uphold. Water companies have been allowed to hike bills this year, in the case of Thames Water, by 31%. My constituents have come to me and said they've received bills of 50-something percent, 70%. Somebody even came with something which was more than 90%. And what are they getting for that? This is not fair when more than a quarter of the bills in Thames Water's case are just paying the interest. Not paying down the debt, but just paying the interest. So again, Ofwat is continuing to allow the pockets of water company creditors to be lined at the expense of ordinary households. Then Ofwat fails to be awake. So Ofwat has a responsibility, and bear with me on this one, for tracking who are the ultimate controllers of the water companies. That should be pretty simple. Who owns the water companies? Just keeping track of that. There aren't many of them. In Thames Water's case, they are taking willful ignorance to an extreme of utterly determined ignorance. Thames Water's largest shareholder, OMERS, wrote its stake down to 0 last May in Thames Water. It pulled its directors off the board last May. When I got a letter from Ofwat last month saying, this has been widely reported in the press, this is not secret, and yet I got a letter from Ofwat confirming that no, they believe that OMERS is still the ultimate controller of the company. Why is Ofwat ignoring this? Why does it matter? Well, by being the ultimate controller of the company, it means that you've got certain responsibilities. Now, those responsibilities are just being ignored. And Ofwat, who is exactly the person who's supposed to be holding them to account, is hiding under a stone somewhere. They need to stop doing this.
Would you give way?
I'll be delighted.
I thank my honourable friend giving way. He says that Ofwat has failed to regulate the water system effectively, failing on environmental, public health and financial interests. In my constituency, Glastonbury and Somerton, Wessex Water is leaking over 400,000 hours of sewage just last year alone. So does he agree with me that the water regulator should be replaced with a Clean Water Authority, which would bring environmental and financial regulation of water companies together?
Charlie Maynard.
I thank my honourable friend, and yes, I absolutely do. Ofwat is also failing to innovate. So Ofwat also appears to do little, if anything, to push companies to do this. This is so critical because if we're going to increase the capacity in sewage treatment works, there are many better ways of doing that. There's a host of new technologies out there, from leak detection, pipeline monitoring and predictive maintenance equipment to trenchless pipe repair and pressure management technologies. Yet I've heard from firms around my constituency that it's easier to sell sewer technology solutions into the US and Europe than it is into the UK. This is where the issue with the dire state of finances of water companies and the sewage scandal intersect. Because, of course, companies cannot make basic repairs, let alone properly innovate and improve, when so much of their revenue is going straight out the door in interest payments. The previous government has got a lot to answer for. It was on their watch that sewage dumping in our rivers and lakes reached record levels, while water companies piled up billions in debt. And all the while, bosses rewarded themselves for mismanagement and failure on so many levels with generous bonuses. And many people working in these companies that worked so hard suffered under that management. There's only so much point in looking backwards. What I'm appalled by is that this new government, who came into power with promises to get tough with the water companies and sort out this scandal, has so far shown themselves to be just about as tough as Ofwat. Your Water Special Measures Act, which was not voted on, by the way, member for North West Leicestershire by us, it was just not voted, was just about nothing. But by you and Conservative Party members rejected a whole host of basic common sense steps in that bill, which were proposed as amendments which could have made the bill genuinely impactful. And I'll give some examples.
I'd just like to suggest that the honourable gentleman is absolutely bringing his remarks to a close rather than giving us some examples, because we do want to hear from the Minister.
OK. I'll make that 3. Thank you very much, and over to you.
Over to her, Minister Emma Harding.
Thank you so much, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I say you are doing an incredibly awesome job being in the chair during this debate. So, and I'd like to thank my, if I can say, honourable friend, the member for Westmorland and Lonsdale, for bringing forward this debate from the Liberal Democrats. And I'm really glad to have this opportunity to close this important debate. And I'd like to pay tribute, if I may, to all environmental groups, all those citizen scientists, all those people involved in campaigning on this important issue up and down the country. And as well, Madam Deputy Speaker, to the people who work within the water industry, the people who have to go out and deal with the sewage overflows, the people working on the front line, the people facing sometimes appalling levels of abuse for doing the job they do. I would like to pay tribute to them and thank them as well. And I welcome the engagement that we've had across the House on the Water Commission. Because as we've heard, sewage spilling into our rivers, lakes and seas is a national disgrace, the result of years of underinvestment by the Conservatives. They left us with crumbling water infrastructure and a broken water system. Instead of fixing our water system, they let water companies use customer monies to pay out unjustifiable bonuses to their polluting bosses and shareholders. We will never let that happen. This Labour government is turning the tide on sewage once and for all. And this isn't just words. In this debate, we've set out exactly how we're going to be doing that. Within days of coming to office, we ring-fenced money earmarked for investment in water infrastructure so it cannot be diverted for bonuses or dividends. And where this money is not spent, it will be returned to customers. Then our landmark...
Thank the Minister for giving way.
Alison Gardner.
She will remember that I raised with her recently concerns brought to me by Staffordshire Wildlife Trust regarding the fines issued to Severn Trent Water on 2024 for their huge sewage leak in my constituency of Stoke-on-Trent South in Strongford. Would she agree with me that the Water Special Measures Bill will indeed make water companies pay for the damage that they have caused, and it is just the start of this government's work to clean up our waterways?
Minister. I thank my honourable friend for her intervention, and she's quite right. The Water Special Measures Bill is a landmark piece of legislation, but it is, of course, just the start of some of the things that we want to achieve. And it will give Ofwat new powers to ban unfair bonuses. It will introduce stricter penalties, including imprisonment. It will enable the regulator to impose automatic and severe fines for wrongdoing, and it will involve cost recovery as well, and mandatory reporting of emergency overflows. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, we don't just want to give you that. We're going to give you so much more than that, more and more. Thank you very much. We're going to go even further with the Independent Water Commission, because as we have heard from honourable members across the House, of course that is not the extent of the ambition of this government. So John Cunliffe is currently undertaking the biggest review of the water sector since privatisation. He'll be making recommendations to deliver long-term benefits, restore water bodies to good health, provide a reliable and efficient supply of water in a changing climate, and ultimately serve both customers and the environment. This independent commission will look to reset the water industry and tackle systematic issues to fundamentally transform the sector. These recommendations will form the basis of further legislation, and I'm already anticipating the amendments from the party opposite to attract the long-term investment to clean up our rivers, lakes and seas for good. But in addition to these measures, Ofwat have announced £104 billion of private sector investment in the water sector over the next 5 years. This will build and upgrade water infrastructure in every region of the country, cutting sewage spills, improving water quality and giving us a reliable future water supply. It will also create tens of thousands of jobs around the country, help us build our 1.5 million homes, support major infrastructure projects and power new industries. This is regional economic growth in action, the cornerstone of our plan for change. Now, turning to the contributions from my honourable friends. My honourable friend, the member of Shrewsbury, who is a champion in her community and has raised with me her concerns around flooding as well as around water pollution, highlighted the importance of the polluter pays principle and how that money can be returned through to the Environment Agency. And of course I share her love of suds. My honourable friend, the member for Monmouthshire, and thank her for her work on the Water Special Measures Bill, and also thank her for the kind and persistent way she has lobbied me about the River Wye. Always so gently, Madam Deputy Speaker, lobbying with such a smile upon her face every time she saw me about the River Wye, which is why I was so pleased that the DEFRA and Welsh Government were able to give the £1 million to research to understand pollution and the other pressures and develop a plan to tackle the issues in the Wye catchment. And my honourable friend from Northumbria, who is there he is over there testing my eyesight this evening. So he's my honourable friend, the Minister for Nature, is happy to go and visit him and to see what he's doing up there, and looking as well at the work he's doing on cleaning up in his area. And the honourable member for Beaconsfield, sadly not in her place. Oh, you're there. This is testing me. This is again with the eyesight testing. It's all confusing me. I hope that she's seen and welcome the changes that we're doing with bathing waters around the definition of a bather, and how that definition of a bather could include as well people involved in water sports, and that's something she might be interested in. I won't, only because I've got 3 minutes and I've got to sit down. My honourable friend, the member for Reading Central, thank you again for the support of the Water Special Measures Bill and for the Commission, and for highlighting the impact that pollution has upon wildlife and the importance of cleaning up our rivers. And my honourable friend, the member for Filton and Bradley Stoke, thanking again for the work, the support for the Water Special Measures Bill. And he's right to highlight the awful inheritance and the action we've taken. My honourable friend, the member for Camborne and Redruth, I'm talking about the WAVE project for supporting mental health. Really keen to sort of hear about that project, and I commend everyone involved in that for their work on that. It sounds like a wonderful... He'll hear me by osmosis. And my honourable friend, the member for High Peak, highlighting that cuts have consequences, and indeed they do. And slashing the Environment Agency's budget by half certainly has had a consequence. And then the honourable member for North West Leicestershire, thank you again for the work and support of the Special Measures Bill and the championing that they do for cleaning up our water. And of course, I also love being by the seaside. And that's why I have to say, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm so delighted that our mayoral candidate for Hull and East Yorkshire is championing a plan to provide free bus services to the coastal areas during the summer holidays so people can enjoy the countryside. Vote Labour. So we have reset the water sector. We are stopping the sewage scandal and transforming the water industry from one of decline to one of opportunity. We are seizing the opportunity to restore national pride in our rivers, lakes and seas and secure reliable water future supply for all. We are delivering our plan for change to create a better future for our country.
The question is that the original words stand part of the question. As many as of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No! Division, clear the lobby. The question is that the original words stand part of the question. As many as of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. The tellers for the ayes are Will Forster and Bobby Dean. The tellers for the noes, Christian Wakeford and Gerald Jones.
favour? The ayes to the right, 77. The noes to the left, 302.
The ayes to the right were 77, the noes to the left 302, so the noes have it, the noes have it. Unlock. The question is that the proposed words be there added. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. Aye. Division, clear the lobby. The question is that the proposed words be there added. As many as of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. The tellers for the ayes are Gerald Jones and Christian Wakeford. The tellers for the noes, Bobby Dean and Will Forster. Order, order.
The ayes to the right, 301. The noes to the left, 69.
The ayes to the right were 301, the noes to the left 69, so the ayes have it, the ayes have it. Unlock.
Madam Deputy Speaker, on a point of order.
I declare the question as amended be agreed to.